I died at 22 with a dozen citations still unwritten, and I thought that was the cruelest joke the world had saved for me. Then I woke inside a newborn's body in a world of swords and cultivation I did not understand. Before I could even open my eyes, a breath of cold yin qi crept into my heart and stopped it dead. 2 lives, and together they had not lasted a single day. In the dark, as my second death closed over me, I did the only sum that mattered, and the answer was unbearable. That was when a pane of light bloomed in the black, and named me its host. A dying scrap of a boy with no spiritual root and ruined bones. It offered me one draw, one single trait, and I seized it without hesitation. The warmth of it crushed the yin qi down and started my heart beating again. After that, it gave me 1 entry every year on my birthday, a lone card pulled from the dark, and most of them looked like plain garbage. Worthless bones 1 year, a scrap of diligence the next, a little cleverness the year after. Yet 3 of a kind could fuse into something far greater. A boy the poison should have killed grew into a monster who cracked the innate realm at 7, and refined pills grown masters could not. And I did it all off traits I drew one at a time, while everyone around me thought me ordinary. If you have ever been handed the worst possible start and told to make something of it anyway, then stay with me. This is the story of how I turned 1 bad card a year into an empire of my own. Drop a comment with the very first entry you would draw, and follow so the next chapter finds you. Now let me take you back to the cold night it began, to a small house of green brick and gray tile. It began with the mother who traded her life so that mine could start at all. I was born on a cold night in the eastern corner of Changgun City, in a small house of green brick and gray tile. The Yuk family held only 3 plain courtyards there. Set against the soaring eaves of the Na and the Jin estates, our home was an unremarkable pebble. I came into the world screaming, hauled up by the heels and slapped until my first cry tore through the dark. Out in the courtyard, my father shot to his feet. His fingers were still stained with sword oil from the blade he had been sharpening an hour before. He threw the cloth over his shoulder and pushed through the curtain into a room thick with the smell of blood. He did not look at me first. He crossed straight to the bed and knelt beside the woman lying there. My mother had gone white as paper, her lips cracked, her hair stuck to her temples with sweat. Her fingertips had turned a bruised purple, and that color was yin qi, creeping up from her hand toward her wrist. 5 months into carrying me, she had been ambushed, and a blast of yin qi had entered her dantian and rotted her origin. She was no cultivator. A mortal body should not have survived that blow at all. She had lasted only because my father fed her his spiritual qi day and night, and because she refused to let go before I was born. Now he pressed his palms to the back of her hand and poured that warmth into her again. She lifted her other hand, laid it over his, and told him not to waste it. He told her not to talk. Her eyes brightened for a breath, then dimmed. She asked him to bring the baby close so she could see. My father lifted me in one hand, cradling the back of my head, and held me before her. I was wrinkled and red, eyes shut, both fists clenched tight. Her finger brushed my cheek and she said the name should be Song. He murmured that the name was too grand for a child like me. She said grand was good, that a grand name made for a tough life. Her hand slid down and came to rest on the quilt. My father gripped it, but the warmth was already leaving her palm, and the spiritual chi he pushed in ran out of her like water into sand. Her eyes closed. He knelt there without moving, a stone statue beside the brazier, until I started crying again. 3 days later, they buried her in the family cemetery beyond the eastern suburbs. My father carved the stone himself, stroke by careful stroke, marking it as the tomb of his beloved wife, Seol Yeona. My uncle stood behind him, a giant of a man, 9 feet of shoulder and scar, and rested one huge hand on my father's back. My grandfather leaned on his cane nearby and said that she had traded her life for the child, and that my father had better raise me well. My father only patted the dust from his knees and said he knew. He took me from the nanny and looked down at my sleeping face for a long time. Then he pulled the oilcloth off his shoulder and threw it away for good. I understood none of it that night. I only learned it later, piece by piece, the way you learn the shape of a scar. The nanny they hired was a widow named O, a local woman in her 30s, with a child of her own at home. The pay was thin, but my father was polite, and the work was light. One night she finished feeding me, settled me in the cradle, and dozed off against a low couch. That was the night the thing sleeping in me finally moved. A cold aura seeped out from my dantian and spread along my meridians toward my limbs. My infant body was too small and too fragile to fight it. The yin qi had waited like a snake in the shadows, and now it struck. My breathing thinned and my heartbeat slowed. Then it stopped, and Nanny-O snored on, and the charcoal popped softly in the basin, and no one noticed a thing. Then there was only darkness, a bottomless pit that swallowed every color in every direction. My consciousness floated in it, and I had felt this once before, not long ago at all. Last time I'd been a college senior on Blue Star, up past 3 in the morning in my dorm, racing to finish a graduation thesis. 17 references still to cite, coffee half drunk, and then a twist in my chest and nothing. It was sudden death at 22, and I had thought that was the end of me. Instead, my awareness had flickered back on inside a baby's body, a blur of warmth and light and voices, before I died a second time to a mouthful of yin chi. 2 whole lives, and together they had not lasted a single day. Somewhere in the black, I felt a flat, absurd anger at the arithmetic of it. Just as I felt myself about to scatter for good, a translucent panel bloomed in the dark. A chime rang, and text scrolled across it. A host signal had been detected. A binding was in progress, and then the binding was complete. It named its host as Yuk Song, age 0, no realm, no technique, no entry to my name. Then it offered a newborn gift, a first free draw, 1 entry to be pulled at once. I did not hesitate because I was dying anyway. Draw. A white light flared across the panel, and a single line of text resolved out of it. It named my first entry as Worthless Bones, a low grade of the white quality. It was a skeletal root that raised my vitality until I was in its exact words about as hard to kill as a cockroach of the infant world. The instant that white light sank into me, warmth leaked out of the gaps in my bones. The yin chi that had been eating my life was squeezed back, not driven out, but crushed down and held. My heart lurched and beat again. My tiny lungs dragged in air and let out a thin whimper, and Nanny O rolled over, muttered, and slept on. A cockroach of the infant world. Fine. As long as it kept breathing, I would take it. I lay in the cradle staring at the black ceiling, chest heaving, and asked the system whether it was serious. It did not answer, so I stopped arguing and started sorting what I knew. A cultivation world, a family I could not name, yin chi in my body, 1 death already behind me, and a single entry standing between me and a second. I knew almost nothing, and only one thing was certain. I had to survive. Time slid by like the muddy little river outside the city. I turned 1. The system handed me a second Worthless Bones, the very same entry, and I cursed it in my heart even as my vitality climbed again. 2 of the same names stacked, and the last of the yin chi was pressed so deep into my dantian that I stopped feeling it in daily life. Small mercies. I would take those 2. At 2, the draw gave me something called Strong Roots and Red Sprout, and its only note was that my little brother would grow up different from other men. I lay under my blanket and stared at that for a long while, wondering what use it could possibly be to a 2-year-old. I checked, out of grim curiosity, and it was admittedly already a bit larger than average. I moved on with what dignity a toddler could muster. At 3, I drew diligence, and my willpower firmed up along with my resolve. I began jogging laps of the courtyard, while other 3-year-olds cried when they tripped. I got up and kept running. Nanny O called me a sturdy child, and my father told her to let me be. My father had changed a great deal in those 3 years. 23 years old, and looking closer to 30, lines already at the corners of his eyes. He spoke less and less. But every single morning he sat me down and taught me to read, and every single night he told me a story before I slept. It was the same handful of stories on a loop, and he was a poor storyteller, but he told them with a plain, stubborn earnestness. I never forgot that. At 4, I drew quick-wittedness, and my reading caught fire. A word taught once stayed, and a passage read twice came back whole. My father found this strange enough to fetch a copy of the 1,000-character classic and test me on it. I flipped through and swallowed it in a glance, and he rubbed my head and grinned and said I took after my mother. At 5, the third Worthless Bones came up, and the panel offered me a choice I had been waiting for. 3 white entries of the same name could be fused into one of the green quality. I told it to synthesize. 3 streaks of white light twisted into 1 green thread, and out of it emerged a new entry, bronze skin and iron bones, a medium-grade skeletal root. My bones had stopped being a joke. At 6, I drew a second quick-wittedness, and with 2 of them stacked, my memory sharpened past forgetting. I could repeat anything I heard, word for word, and lose nothing I had seen. By then I understood the Yuk family well enough. 3 generations, 1 thin branch each, all of us climbing out of the mud by the same road. My grandfather, Yukrim, had been a hunter outside the city in his youth. He broke into the martial Dao's innate realm only at 50, nurtured a low-grade spiritual root, and stepped onto the cultivation path late enough to found this house on nothing. At 67, he stood at the 3rd layer of chi refinement. No great figure in the city, but a cultivator all the same. That counted for something here, and in truth it counted for almost everything. My uncle, Yuknam-san, was 31 and stuck at the postnatal peak. He had jammed against the threshold of the innate realm for years, without ever growing a spiritual root. Immortal cultivation was not his road, yet his raw martial skill was famous among the loose cultivators of the city. He stayed unmarried, saying he would not chain some poor woman to a man like him. My father, Yu Cohen, was 26, and his talent for the martial Dao ran high. He had cracked the innate realm at 18, grown a spiritual root at 20, and converted his cultivation to the immortal path. At the second layer of chi refinement, he ranked among the best of the city's young martial artists. And no more than that. In the third generation, there was only me. Today my father meant to test my spiritual root. In the main hall, my grandfather took the seat of honor, both hands folded over the head of his cane. My uncle stood to the left with his arms crossed, the scar catching the morning light. My father carried out a fist-sized stone, milky white and smooth all over, and set it on the table. He knelt to my eye level, called it a spirit testing stone, and told me to lay my hand on it. I already knew what would happen. Yin Qi had gnawed my innate foundation to ruin before I ever drew breath, and not one entry the system had given me in 6 years touched a spiritual root. Every last one was body or mind, but the motion still had to be gone through. I stood on my toes and pressed my right palm to the stone, and the stone did nothing at all. It did not glow or change color or so much as tremble. It was an ordinary rock, and my uncle's brow knit at it. My grandfather tapped the head of his cane twice. My father flipped the stone over without a flicker of surprise and told me to try the other hand, and my left palm drew the same flat nothing. The hall went quiet. My uncle started to say something, but my father cut across him, calm as still water, and named the reason plainly. My mother had been wounded carrying me, Yin Qi had entered her, and the child's innate foundation was damaged. No spiritual root was only to be expected. He tossed the stone onto the table and knelt again in front of me. There was no disappointment in his eyes. He flicked my forehead and asked what there was to fear in having no spiritual root. He had earned his own only at 18, and my grandfather his only at 50. In this family, he said spiritual roots had never once fallen out of the sky. Then he held up one finger and named the road. Martial Tao. Break into the innate realm, he told me, and the spiritual chi of heaven and earth would flood the body and grow a spiritual root in the Dantian on its own. The quality would be poor, but poor was a beginning, and both he and my grandfather had walked exactly that path. My grandfather nodded from the high seat and said the second son was right, that the Yuk family had no natural roots but had tough bones. My uncle grinned a row of white teeth and swore that when it came to fighting he would take on anyone in the city. The martial Tao, he said, fell little short of immortal cultivation. I stood among the three of them and looked from face to face. My grandfather stood steady as an old pine, my uncle rough and blunt as a blade. My father, quick and bright and certain of me. 3 generations, one road, all of it uphill out of the dirt. This family had entered the Tao through the fist and the sword and had never once tasted luxury. If not for my birth 6 years back, which forced them to hire a nanny, they would have kept no servants at all. I clenched my fists and felt the bronze skin and iron bones working quietly under my skin, my muscle and bone already denser than any child my age. 6 years of entries had given me no power to fly and no way to burrow through earth. They had given me a body that could take a beating and a mind that never forgot, and I meant to build on both. So I asked my father, clear and plain, when I could start practicing. He froze a moment, then laughed, and it was the fullest laugh I had heard from him in the 6 years since my mother died. He asked what the rush was, then swept me up and hoisted me onto his shoulder, and answered his own question. Tomorrow. We would start tomorrow, and he would teach me himself. I rode his shoulder and watched the sunlight pour into the courtyard, doing the sums in my head. Innate realm, then a nurtured spiritual root. That was the road 3 generations of my family had proven. But I did not intend to spend 50 years on it, and I did not intend to spend 18 either. In the corner of the panel, 327 days remained until my next draw. My father was as good as his word. The next morning, before the sky had fully paled, he hauled me out of bed and into a courtyard silvered with frost. He stood by the well in thin clothes, holding a bucket of fresh-drawn water, and told me the first bucket was to wake me up. I took a step back, but he had already thrown it. The ice water crashed over my head and set me shivering, teeth clacking together. Bronze skin and iron bones made my body strong, but a 6-year-old frame doused in well water in the cold was still, unarguably cold. He set the bucket down, satisfied I was awake, and made me repeat the shape of the martial Tao after him. 3 realms, he said. Body tempering, then the postnatal realm, then the innate. Body tempering refined skin and flesh, tendon and bone, while the postnatal realm cultivated the circulation of true chi. The innate realm linked a man to the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and the 3 were walls that could not be leapt, only climbed. I repeated it back word for word. Quick-wittedness made that trivial, one hearing carved straight into the mind. He nodded and drew a thin, yellowed booklet from his robe. The words in it art brushed across its cover. This, he said, was the technique he himself had practiced, fit for a martial artist with no spiritual root, carrying a man from body tempering all the way to the innate realm. It was not top tier, he admitted, but it walked an upright road and laid a solid foundation. I took it and flipped it open. The pages were written in the old script, and thanks to years of my father's morning lessons, I read it clean, 3 pages front to back in one pass, memory locking every character down. The logic was clear enough. The technique used the body's 8 extraordinary meridians as a frame, guiding blood and chi in circles to slowly strengthen the flesh. Body tempering had 9 ranks, each tied to the tempering of 1 meridian, and only at perfect completion of the 9th could a man draw chi inside and step into the postnatal realm. He asked whether I still remembered the meridian paths he had taught me. I began reciting the course of the lung meridian, from its start in the middle burner down to the large intestine and back up through the diaphragm. He waved me off at the corner of his mouth twitching, and called me a show-off. Then he crouched, took my wrist, and laid 2 fingers on the pulse points to read me. My meridians ran wider than my peers, he said, and my bones were dense, my foundation already firmer than his had been at 6. I said nothing, for I knew exactly which entry that was. He set a wooden rack in the courtyard, 12 sandbags of different sizes hung along it, and named the drill. It was fists, palms, backhands, and elbows. 50 strikes a bag, 12 bags a round. 3 rounds a day, all paired with the first layer of the innate art to drive blood and chi to the skin. I stripped off my outer shirt and stepped up. I threw the first punch, the bag swayed, and a sharp sting spread across the back of my hand. I did not stop, and the second punch followed at once. My father corrected my stance at first, then gave up and leaned on the wall to drink his tea. The child did not cry out, did not complain, did not slack. For a 6-year-old, the rhythm of my punches held frighteningly steady. When the first round ended, the backs of my hands were raw and red, tiny beads of blood welling up. I only shook them out and started the second round. Diligence did not make me tireless. It simply crushed the thought of stopping down to almost nothing. After 3 rounds, I sat cross-legged and circulated the first layer of the innate art. Blood and chi surged, and a hot current crawled along the lung meridian. Where ordinary people had to grope for their meridian paths over many tries, mine were wide and springy, and the chi ran through the instant I guided it. No snags, no resistance. 1 breathing cycle closed. I opened my eyes to hands that had already stopped bleeding, the redness sinking fast, and on the panel the Marshall Dow column flickered to the first rank of body tempering. One day, my father's tea bowl paused halfway to his mouth. He looked at the sky, then at me sitting on the ground, and set the bowl down. He asked whether I had truly opened the lung meridian, and I nodded. He went quiet. 3 full seconds before crouching to check my pulse again. When he looked up, his face was a tangle of things he could not name. He admitted with a curse that it had taken him 2 months to reach the first rank himself. He paced the courtyard twice and came back down to ask if I had been training in secret behind his back. I said no. He asked how, then, I had broken into the first rank on the very first day. I thought it over and gave the most reasonable answer a 6-year-old could give. Maybe, I said. I was just born with hard bones. He stared at me a long while, then stood, doubled the weight of the next set of sandbags, and told me we would train the second rank tomorrow. The second day, the second rank. The third day, the third. My father stopped talking, but each night his footsteps back to his room came a little faster. On the 4th morning, he swapped all 12 bags for iron sand in 1 stroke, and told me to continue. My knuckles thudded dull against the iron, the pain 3 times sharper than before, but no bone cracked. Bronze skin and iron bones drank the impact. 4th rank, the 5th day, the 5th rank. My father sat on the threshold and stared at nothing for a long time. It had cost him 2 years to break through body tempering, and my uncle 3.5. The fastest of the city's young talents, the Dan family's heir, had reportedly needed 8 months. His son had reached the 5th rank in 5 days. My father had spent his whole life shrugging things off with a careless what of it. That evening he sat on the threshold for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, and the smile lines deepened into his face. When I finished and found him, he wiped the smile away, put on a stern face, and asked if I was hungry. I said I was. He told me to come along, that his son would eat meat tonight. From the 6th day to the 9th, I woke at the 5th watch to throw punches, circulate the art, eat, punch more, circulate more, eat and sleep. The routine was numbing and the progress monstrous. 6th rank, 7th, 8th, 9th. On the evening I broke the 9th, all 9 meridians tempered. My blood roared through me like a flood, and a faint hum rose out of my bones. I stood and closed my fists, and a 6-year-old's single hand now gripped harder than a grown man's. On the 10th day, I sat under the old locust tree and pushed the innate art to its limit. All 9 meridians shook at once. My blood and chi gathered in the dantian, and then the whole of it blew outward. Skin, muscle, tendon, and bone drank the surge together in a single instant, and finished the last change. I opened my eyes to a new line on the panel. Body tempering. Perfection. From the first punch to full perfection, exactly 10 days. My father leaned against a corridor pillar, crushing a herb shop receipt in his fist. He had just spent a whole spirit stone on a pile of body-tempering herbs, and now the herbs were ready and the boy no longer needed them. 1 spirit stone, 3 doses used. He crumpled the receipt, stuffed it up his sleeve, and muttered under his breath about a terrible loss. That same night, he told my grandfather and my uncle everything. The lamps in the main hall burned half the night. My grandfather came in leaning on his cane, but his steps ran twice their usual speed, a 67-year-old in a threadbare robe with a few loose strands of hair behind his ears. He set the cane down and went over me with both hands, pinching my shoulder bones, my forearms, pressing my knees and ankles and ribs. His touch was practiced and sure, a skill honed from his hunting years, when he read a beast by the feel of its skeleton. I held still and let him work. He ran his fingers down my spine, vertebra by vertebra, his brow drawing tighter. Bone dense as iron, he said, tendons springy as vine. A 6-year-old body with the bone age of 13 or 14. This was no ordinary high talent. My uncle asked what he meant, and my grandfather did not answer at once. He gripped his cane and circled me. He spoke of a greenback bear he had hunted in his youth on Undu Mountain. The beast was only 2 years old, yet its skeleton ran twice the size of its kind, its bones threaded with fine dense patterns as though born to take a beating. He had learned later that men called such a thing a special physique, and that humans could carry it too. Then he stopped and looked at me and said the word out loud. This child had a special physique. His bone density ran far past ordinary men, his meridians wide and tough, his blood abundant, his body built to absorb and heal past the normal range. 10 days to body tempering perfection was not fast cultivation. It was a body meant to move this fast. My uncle rubbed his palms together, unable to keep his voice down, and my grandfather cut in before he could finish. The postnatal realm would not be slow. How high the ceiling of such a physique climbed, he could not say, but one thing was sure. He turned to my father and told him that, barring disaster, this child would reach the innate realm inside 10 years. 10 years. My father's throat bobbed, and I was 6. In 10 years, I would be 16, and the innate realm at 16 was 2 years ahead of my father, and a full 34 ahead of my grandfather. 3.5 innate experts in one family, and those who knew which of them was the half. My uncle summed the whole thing up with a single ripe curse. My grandfather sank back into his chair and planted his cane, and ruled that from the next day the family's resources went first to me. My uncle raised no objection at all, only thumped his chest and pledged half his own budget for innate pills. My father glanced at me, standing calm in the center of the hall, a 6-year-old weighed like treasure by 3 elders, and showing neither pride nor unease. He drew his gaze back with the corner of his mouth curving, and said that from tomorrow they would teach me the true chi circulation of the postnatal realm. I ran my own numbers in silence. Bronze skin and iron bones was a green entry, worth a medium-grade spiritual root, near enough to a special physique to outstrip ordinary martial artists by a wide margin. Inside this family, that was more than enough. In the city at large, it would still pass as respectable. But I knew better than anyone that this was a starting line, not a finish. 3 months on, autumn wind came over the courtyard wall, carrying the scent of distant pines. I sat cross-legged on the stone steps, true chi circling me, a thin membrane of chi clinging faint to my skin. The 4th layer of the postnatal realm. 3 months to climb from body tempering perfection to here. The innate art already worked to its 5th layer. The circulation paths worn smooth and familiar. Slower than the body tempering stage, and still, in my grandfather's eyes, astounding. The family had shifted in those 3 months, and the biggest change was my uncle. He had been jammed at the postnatal peak for 7 years, iron twisted to its breaking point. The night I reached body tempering perfection, he drilled his blade alone in the backyard until dawn, then locked himself in the woodshed. 3 days later, the woodshed door blew apart from the inside under a single palm. When he walked out, his aura ran deep as an abyss, and the spiritual chi of the innate realm rolled off him. He had broken through, a 7-year bottleneck, cracked in a single day, spurred by a nephew who had done body tempering perfection in 10. That day, my grandfather killed a chicken and laid a table, and after 3 cups of yellow wine, he told his eldest son, "Well done." My uncle grinned until the scar bent into a crescent. Now he sat in secluded cultivation in the backyard, coaxing a spiritual root to condense in his dantian, and the family stood one step from crossing the threshold of 3 innate cultivators. The road ahead of me was still very long. That morning, just as I finished my session, my father came from the front hall with a rare, serious face and told me to come to the main hall. I followed him past the screen wall, where 2 more people waited inside. A young man sat in the guest seat, late 20s, slim, sharp of brow and bright of eye, in a dark cyan brocade robe cinched with a silver-buckled belt, his hair pinned with white jade. His bearing was steady and unassuming, and his teacup had clearly been lifted and set down many times already. Beside him stood a little girl of about 6, her hair in 2 top knots tied with pale blue ribbons, her round face fair and smooth, her eyes bright as fresh-washed black grapes. She wore a pink jacket and skirt embroidered with tiny cloud patterns, tiger head shoes on her feet. She was working her way through a red bean candy figure lick by lick. The moment the young man saw me, his eyes lit. He looked me up and down, a boy a size larger than his years, with faint muscle at the neck and forearms. Steps steady and yet oddly light. He stood and praised me as a fine lad, vigorous in blood and chi, and told my father he had raised his son well. I looked at the stranger, then at the girl and her candy, and asked who this uncle was. The young man's mouth twitched. He glanced down at his brocade robe and jade hairpin and silver buckle, sideburns freshly trimmed for the visit, and mouthed the word uncle in horror. He was only 28. My father coughed beside me and lost the fight against a grin. The young man breathed deep, squatted down, and tried his level best to look kindly and approachable. He gave his name as Na Bong and named the girl as his daughter Na Soso. For a second I froze. The two names dropped side by side and snapped an old memory into place. It was some hero from a story I read in my past life. A man in a V-neck sweater devouring stars and fighting aliens across a federation of carbon-based life. I looked at Na Bong again, then at the small girl gnawing her candy, and reminded myself firmly that this was a cultivation world. I put the absurd thing away and corrected myself, greeting him properly as Uncle Na, and only then did he stand up satisfied and pat my shoulder, the force not weak. My father chose his moment. He told me Uncle Na was an old friend, that this was his daughter's first time in the city, and that I should take her around the courtyard to get acquainted. I looked up and caught his eye and he gave me a quick wink. I had lived 2 lives, and though the first ran only 22 years, I had read enough to know this trope in my sleep. 2 families close, the elders shut in the hall for a private talk, the children sent off to get acquainted, a childhood betrothal, a textbook one, and I was 6. I walked over to the girl with the flat face. Na Soso pulled the candy from her mouth, fixed her round eyes on me, and asked if I was Yuksung. I said yes. She asked my age. I said 6, and she announced that she was 6'2" before holding the candy up and offering me a bite. I pointed out that she had already licked it. She said only once. I declined, and she pulled it back and went on licking, complaining under her breath that I was no fun. I led her out toward the courtyard, and behind us my father closed the hall door from the inside. She trailed me around the old locust tree, wiping sticky fingers on her dress, informing me that my house was small. I agreed. She told me hers was huge, 3 courtyards and a pond of koi. I agreed to that too, and she demanded to know why I only ever said yes. I stopped and turned. The 6-year-old looked up at me, round eyes brimming with genuine offense. I was quiet 2 seconds, then asked how many koi were in her pond. She lit up, shouted 17, and began counting off their colors on her fingers. I leaned against the locust tree and let her chatter wash over me. The autumn wind turned 2 yellow leaves across the wall. The hall door stayed shut. Behind that door I already knew. They were arranging the major event of my life while I was 6 years old, and could not even run away. Inside the hall, as I pieced it together later, Na Bong got down to business. He and my father had sworn an oath back in their escort guard days that any children of theirs would be sworn siblings if the same, married if not. Na Bong had never once broken his word in his life. His branch of the Na family, a foundation establishment house, had never cared for rank, and he knew my father's character and ability better than anyone. My father knocked the mud off his soles and pointed out the plain gap. The Na family stood at foundation establishment and the Yuk family at chi refinement, and whatever Na Bong felt, his own father might feel otherwise. Na Bong waved it off, said he would handle his father, and admitted the visit carried more than a betrothal. He drew out a contract and pushed it across, offering to buy every pound of yellow sprout rice our fields grew from now on, at 1 spirit stone for every 10 pounds. My father's hand froze mid-air. Our 2 plots of low-grade spirit field grew a first-tier low-grade rice, harvested twice a year, 500 or 600 pounds a plot. We had always sold it piecemeal and cheap to the city grain shops, 15 pounds to a spirit stone, and swallowed the shopkeeper's sneers besides. 10 pounds to a stone was a clean 30% jump. 2 plots, some 2,000 odd pounds a year, came to at least 200 stones at that price. My father read the contract twice and closed it, and asked Na Bong straight whether he had come for a betrothal or to hand out charity. Na Bong spread his hands and said the rice had always been worth this much, and only the short-sighted grain shops had kept it low. My father looked at him, then tucked the contract into his sleeve and said he would take the deal and that the marriage could wait until the children were grown. Na Bong nodded and clinked their cups together and said there was no rush. Out in the courtyard, the hall door finally creaked open, and the 2 men came out wearing matching smiles. My father waved me over, crouched, and put on the face of a man who had everything under control. From today, he said, Uncle Na's family and ours were close friends, and if I ever needed anything, I had only to ask. I glanced at Na Bong, then at Na Soso crouched over a line of ants, and asked my father whether he had just sold me. He smacked the back of my head and demanded to know what I was talking about, and Na Bong laughed out loud nearby. I rubbed my head and let it drop. But I had seen the folded contract in his sleeve, and the way Na Bong looked at me, weighing a future son-in-law. So I kept my mouth shut, since some things were not urgent. I could not run anyway. The day I turned 7, a thin autumn rain fell over the city, and after it stopped, the old pagoda tree in the courtyard hung bright and dripping. That morning, my grandfather sent Nanny O to the East Street for 2 pounds of pork head meat, a roast chicken, and half a jar of yellow wine. Our banquets had always been like that, a full table of plain, hearty food, and nothing fancy. In blunter words, the Uke family was poor and could not afford the pills that let cultivators skip meals. My uncle had just come out of seclusion the day before, darker from it, his eyes frighteningly bright. He dragged a big round table into the courtyard and tried to filch a chicken leg, and my grandfather rapped his knuckles with the cane and told him to wait for everyone. Na Bong arrived with Na Soso half an incense stick early, dressed down today in navy without the jade pin, his hair loose, looking years younger. Na Soso came behind him in a pale yellow dress with an oil paper bundle in both hands, calling my name across the courtyard before she had cleared the gate. I was crouched by the well washing my hands and glanced back. She ran over and thrust the bundle at me, osmanthus cakes her mother had made, and swore they were delicious. I thanked her and opened it for a sniff, and it was genuinely fragrant. Over the past year, she had come to the city with her father 3 times, always bearing food, always trailing me and chirping like a courtyard sparrow. I had grown used to it. Once the dishes were down, the 7 of us sat, my grandfather at the head, my uncle and father to either side, Na Bong in the guest seat, me beside my father, Na Soso dragging a stool in to wedge herself against me. Nanny O brought the last dish and stood aside to watch. My grandfather raised his cup, said only that his grandson was 7 now, tapped the table, and drank. My uncle followed him down and boomed that his nephew was 7 and already at the 7th layer of the postnatal realm, a good omen. My father did not lift his cup at once. Instead, he laid a slice of pork head meat in my bowl and told me to eat first. I chewed and listened to the adults talk. Na Bong and my father traded news of yin-fing beasts nesting near the mountains, and my grandfather and my uncle argued over whether to take Hunters Guild bounties. Na Soso sat beside me gnawing a chicken wing, her cheeks puffed like a squirrel's. Halfway through the meal, I set down my chopsticks. The panel had lit. My 7th year draw was ready. My heart skipped, and I told it to draw, and a white light flashed deep in my mind. A third quick-wittedness. I picked up my bowl and sipped my soup, face unmoved, while under the table Na Soso tried to steal my uncle's chicken leg and got it shielded away. Nobody noticed a thing. I summoned the panel and lined the 3 white quick-wittedness entries up in a row. The last time, 3 of a name had fused into bronze skin and iron bones. This time, the panel offered the same, and I told it to synthesize. 3 white lights wound together and melted into a soft green glow, and a new entry surfaced. Extraordinary savvy, a medium comprehension. My understanding and insight doubled. My hand on the bowl went still, and I spent 2 seconds swallowing that line. Comprehension. My combined 28 years across 2 lives had taught me that talent, effort, and resources could all be patched with substitutes, up to a point. Comprehension could not. Comprehension was the instinct for the underlying law, the eye that found the one right thread in 100. In my old life, it was the last problem on the exam. The one some people stared at blankly for half an hour while others saw exactly where the crack was at a glance. That was the whole difference, and mine had just doubled. I set the bowl down. Bronze, skin, and iron bones had given me a body that could take a beating. Extraordinary savvy gave me a mind that could see through to the bones of a thing. Na Soso turned her head, chicken fat at the corner of her mouth, and asked what was wrong, whether I had stopped eating. I said I was eating, picked my chopsticks back up, and put a piece of chicken in my mouth. The chicken was good, and my mood was even better. After the meal, as the sun sank, Na Bong made to take his daughter home. She dawdled and clung to my sleeve with reddened eyes, begging to come back next month. I told her to ask her father and pulled my sleeve free. Na Bong stood at the gate with his arms crossed in a knowing smile, and my father leaned on a pillar wearing the exact same one. The 2 of them traded a look that made my scalp prickle. In the end, she was carried off on her father's shoulders, waving back at me, her pale skirt swaying in the dusk. Her voice was loud enough for half the street to hear as she promised to bring me sesame crisps next time. I stood at the door and watched them vanish around the alley corner. My father's voice came from behind me, remarking that the Naw girl was not bad. I turned and reminded him that I was 7. That, he said solemnly, was exactly why he had only said not bad, since anything warmer would be something no 7-year-old should be fretting over. I did not want to pursue the topic, and for once he let it go. He looked up at the sky, the smile fading into something steady and serious, and said that from tomorrow he would teach me the sword. The next morning at the 5th watch, I stood in the courtyard running through stances, my 7th layer true chi flowing like a quiet stream. The autumn air was cool and not yet cold, the pagoda leaves rustling overhead. My father came out carrying a sword, Not the one he usually wore, the one that had been with him 10 years and bore 7 repair marks. This was an unsharpened iron sword, 3 feet and 2 inches, thick-bladed and pitch black and heavy. He told me to catch, tossed it, and I took it one-handed. 15 pounds, near enough. He was in no hurry to teach me moves. First he drew a thin booklet from his robe, as yellowed as the innate art had been but on slightly better paper, its cover reading 13 swords. I opened it. The first page held a single line, that one sword begins and 13 swords end, each linking to the next, each carrying forward, until all become one momentum. Every page after showed a single form, pictures and text together, diagrams of true chi threading the meridians and the paths the blade traveled. The 13 forms ran simple to complex. The first 3 were streams, the middle 5 rivers, and the last 5 so densely drawn that the lines had no visible start or end. I read it page by page and closed it. An extraordinary savvy showed its edge for the first time. Reading it once, I memorized all of it, and that was quick-wittedness. But at the same time, I understood the logic beneath the 13 swords, and that was the savvy. The 13 forms did not stand apart. They were 13 links on one chain, the closing stance of each sword becoming the opening move of the next, the true chi flowing on without a snag, force stacking on force. Pushed to the limit, the 13 swords merged into one, done in a single breath, unstoppable. And the end of that road pointed at one thing: sword intent. My father said the rules were the same as the innate art. He would demonstrate once and I would follow. He drew his own side sword, angled it toward the blue stone, and began, spiritual power sinking down into true chi. The first sword was a plain straight thrust, but he broke it down clean. The twist of the wrist at the start, the turn of waist and hip in the thrust, the path of chi from dantian to sword tip on the recovery. As the blade fell, it left a white line scored in the stone. He stopped after only the third sword and told me to master the first 3 before we spoke of the rest, then stepped back to the wall. I raised the iron sword. The first sword, a straight thrust, the blade tracing an arc that was not pretty but was precise. True chi rushing from my dantian along the lung meridian into the body of the blade. The iron sword hummed the instant I thrust, and against the wall my father straightened a little. The second sword, a diagonal upward slash off the close of the thrust, waist and hip turning, the blade cutting its arc. The third, a level sweep heavy as a mountain, the sword wind lifting fallen leaves off the ground. The 3 ran together in one smooth motion, and I withdrew tip touching stone. My father came over, lifted my right hand and checked the web of it. No redness, no shock injury, proof the force had been thrown correctly and the sword's recoil discharged into the ground. He asked who had taught me. I said no. 1, that the manual had drawn it clearly. His mouth twitched, and he told me to go on, then demonstrated the remaining 10 forms in one flow. He had drilled the 13 swords for years, and every form was polished smooth and sharp, his sword chi swirling the withered leaves 3 feet up the wall. When he sheathed it, I closed my eyes and ran the full 13 through my mind. Extraordinary savvy pushed my grasp of each form past how it was done and into why. I opened my eyes and raised the sword. By the 4th, there was a tiny hitch in the transition, and I steadied my breath and let the chi settle back into place. 5th, 6th. At the 8th, my wrist angle was off by a hair and the blade trembled, and I stopped. The first 8 were mastered. The last 5 wanted finer true chi control and finer coordination than I had yet. My father called it enough for the day, his voice calm, though the hand behind his back was pinching its own knuckles. 1 day and 8 forms. I had reached the entry level. That evening he drank half a jar of wine in the main hall and slapped away my uncle's attempt to pour him a bowl, growling that he would drink alone. My uncle left with the empty bowl, baffled. By the evening of the 3rd day I withdrew my sword in the courtyard. The 13 forms run start to finish in one unbroken breath. The iron sword rang high and clear at the closing stance, tip hovering an inch off the ground, and a hard gust swept a ring of dust off the blue stone. Minor achievement. I flipped my wrist and racked the sword, then looked down at my right hand. Nowhere on the web of it, the whole method grasped. The power of each sword was born not in the arm, but sent up from the soles, through waist and hip to shoulder and elbow, and out through the wrist. The blade was only the last carrier of the force. The panel stayed quiet, no new line. Extraordinary savvy improved me in a steady and visible way. Unlike bronze skin and iron bones with its plain physical change, it was more like putting on glasses. Everything I saw simply clearer than before. Under the corridor, my father held a bowl of tea and did not drink for a long while. 3 days to minor achievement in the 13 forms, against his own 2 months just to reach entry, and a year and a half to minor achievement. He found no comparison worth making. I walked over, sweat still on the black blade, and told him plainly what I had felt. The last 5 forms all rode the leftover momentum of the first 8, the force stacking higher and higher without trouble, but past the 11th my body could not keep up. He took a sip of tea and told me to be specific. I said the 12th wanted the waist to twist and the wrist to flip at once, but my angle ran 3 parts off. The close of the 13th came too hurried, so the chi returning to the dantian collided with the leftover momentum of the 12th in the large intestine meridian. My body could bear it, but it cost me sword speed. He set the bowl down and straightened, and stared at me a few seconds. The things I had just named, he said, he had only worked out after 6 years of practice. I did not answer. He rose, went into the courtyard, pulled his side sword and told me to watch closely, starting straight from the 11th form. The sword light was fierce, splitting the autumn wind. At the 12th he slowed on purpose, waist and hip and wrist turning in the same breath, the angle precise to the smallest fraction. My eyes did not blink. Extraordinary savvy ran at full stretch, and I saw it. The key to joining waist and wrist in the 12th was not speed but timing. The waist moved 3 parts first, and the wrist 3 parts after, one following the other under a look of simultaneity. That 3-part gap was the answer to the chi collision in the 13th. The waist turns first and lets its chi travel a little, and the wrist follows and finishes the path. By the close of the 13th, the 2 currents are offset by a single beat and never meet. My father recovered and turned and asked if I had seen it clearly. I said I had. He tossed me the sword and told me to practice. I caught it, spun it half a turn, and began not from the 11th but from the 1st. 13 forms, start to finish. At the 12th, the waist moved 3 parts first and the wrist followed. At the 13th, the close came steady. The chi returned to the dantian. No collision, no snag. The tip hovering. The courtyard was silent a moment. My father closed his eyes, opened them, and said one word. Major achievement. His tone was flat as he walked back to the corridor, sat in his spot and picked up his tea, which had gone cold. He sipped it, hissed, and said nothing. 10 days, entry to major achievement. Against his own 6 years, which made his son more than 200 times faster, and made his temple throb. I racked the sword and came back, pointing at the door, and told him it was time to eat, that my uncle had made braised pork. He said, "Oh," stood, and poured the cold tea into a flower pot. He took 2 steps, stopped, and turned to look at me, and started to say something. In the end, he only patted my shoulder and left it there. After major achievement, he told me the next step, his voice rare and grave. The 13 momentums had to be fused into a single complete intent, a stage called the sword intent prototype. My uncle had broken into the innate realm on fist intent not long ago, and my father had done it on sword intent years back. But this thing was not drilled into being, only comprehended. I asked when I might comprehend it. He shook his head and said it was hard to say. He had reached major achievement in the 13 forms and not touched the sword intent prototype until 17. My grandfather had grasped his in one blade stroke at the edge of death, and such things could not be rushed. He patted the back of my head, light as ever, and told me that major achievement in 10 days already made me a monster. I should take it slow, and that the rest of the road would not be lost over so short a wait. I nodded. He was right. Take it slow. But something had begun to move in my head. 13 swords and 13 momentums, 13 streams into one river. And what waited at the end of the river? Over 3 days I practiced 6 hours a day and ran the 13 moves thousands of times. The moves grew so smooth I could throw them blind without error. Yet the sword intent stayed a layer of mist, its outline clear and its substance untouchable. My father saw it all and did not push. On the 4th evening I finished, withdrew my stance, and let out a long breath. I was stuck. The moves had hit their ceiling, and the intent would not be held. It felt like a hard math problem in my old life, every formula memorized and every step written out, missing only the last flash, the right side of the equal sign. My father brought out a bowl of hot soup and told me to drink and rest. I sat on the stone steps and sipped it while he crouched beside me, elbows on knees, chin on his hands, looking at the blue stone the sword wind had swept clean. Hundreds of shallow white marks crossed the ground from these days of practice. He asked whether I wanted to hear how he had comprehended sword intent back then. I said I did. He picked at the calluses under his nails and began. At 17, he had followed an escort caravan along the south line of the mountains and run into a pack of low-grade demon beasts, iron-spine wolves. The lead she-wolf had the strength of the second layer of chi refinement and swatted him into a ravine, 3 ribs broken, his left arm out of its socket, his sword gone. I turned to look at him, and his tone stayed easy. When the pack chased in, he lay at the bottom of the ravine, seeing only a sliver of sky, stone walls to either side, a dead end ahead, nowhere left to go. The she-wolf dropped down, 10 steps off, and he held up one finger and said that in that moment he had held exactly one thought. He would not die there, not from fear of death, he said, but from the plain sense that too much was still left undone. Then he grinned and said he had picked up a rock. A rock, I said. There were no swords in the ravine, he answered. Only rocks. He spread his hands to show the size of it, palm-sized, sharp-edged, and said he had gripped that rock with a single thing left in his heart. Cleave through what stood in front of him. A rock used as a sword. He forgot every move of the 13 swords and remembered one word. Cleave. And when that strike went out, the rock shattered and the she-wolf's skull split open with it. Later, he said, he understood that the strike had been sword intent. I held the bowl without moving and said he meant that the intent was not in the moves. He stood and stretched, and said that 13 swords and 13 styles were in the end only 13 ways to cleave a thing, and a method drilled 10,000 times was still only a method. His gaze went rare and sharp, and he told me I had to find the reason that made me absolutely have to cut the thing before me. Then he slapped the back of my head with the usual force and declared his big lecture over. The rest was mine. He told me not to fret, that I was only 7, and that if I cracked this in a single day too, he would lose his mind. He walked off toward the kitchen with his hands behind his back, humming. I sat on the steps with half the soup gone and let my eyes fall on the crisscross sword marks in the stone. Extraordinary savvy worked in silence. 13 swords, 13 ways to cleave, and the method was never the goal. The goal was simply to cleave. And yet to cleave what? I closed my eyes and ran the 13 through my mind. Not the diagram lines, not the trained muscle, but something under them. The rise of force, the shift of angle, the flow of chi for each sword, stripped of the shell of form until only the core was left. Break. The first sword breaks skin, the second flesh, the third sinew, and onto the 13th, which breaks the hardest shell of all. What shell? I gripped the iron sword and stood. No stance, no circulated chi, no wind-up. I only stood in the courtyard holding the blade while the locust leaves rustled overhead and the wind came from the east. I opened my eyes, and I saw it. Not with my eyes, but with my whole body at once. Every meridian and every wisp of chi in my dantian seeing it in the same instant. The 13 swords had never been 13 moves. They were the passage of one sword cleaving through everything in the world. The passage did not matter. What mattered was that the sword moved forward and nothing stopped it. I struck. No form pattern, only one sword, a plain diagonal from lower right to upper left. The iron blade cut the air with no sound, no wind, not a wisp of leaking chi. On the old locust, a branch thick as a chopstick fell silently, its cut smooth as a mirror. My father had just reached the kitchen door, and he stopped, his back to me, his shoulders locking. He had felt it, sword intent, weak, only a prototype, but that sharp momentum had traveled clear across the courtyard to him. He turned his head slowly. I stood holding the iron sword, hand hanging at my side, no expression on my face, the broken branch at my feet with a bead of sap welling from the cut. My father opened his mouth, and I could see him remembering what he had just promised, that if I did this in a day he would lose his mind. He closed his eyes and looked up while the autumn wind mussed his hair. After a long moment he lowered his head, opened his eyes and jerked his chin at me and said to come eat, and to reheat the soup if it had gone cold. He turned into the kitchen, and where he thought no one could see, the corners of his mouth climbed. I glanced at the panel which now read the 7th layer of the postnatal realm, sword intent prototype, and I sheathed the sword. I looked up at the last streak of sunset, my own mouth curving. Another leaf drifted down and settled on my shoulder. On the roof of the main house my grandfather stood, and no one had seen him arrive. His hands were folded over the head of his cane, his hunched body wrapped in old cotton. He had watched the whole strike from start to finish. The wind stirred his graying hair, and he was not smiling now. He tapped the cane twice, turned, and walked slowly back along the ridge. And after a few steps he stopped and looked back once more at the 7-year-old standing in the courtyard. The next day before dawn, my grandfather went out on his cane and came back after the sun had cleared the wall. In his hand was a palm-sized Celadon bottle, its mouth sealed with wax, pills clinking faintly inside. I was cross-legged in the courtyard circulating my power. He walked up and set the bottle on the ground before me. True chi pills, he said, unranked goods but enough for the postnatal realm. One a day after meals, worked with the innate art, and I could draw off 80% of the medicine. I pulled the wax and sniffed a faint medicinal musk over a bitter herb scent, then asked what the bottle had cost. 30 pills, he said. 30 low-grade spirit stones. My fingers paused. One unranked pill was worth 1 spirit stone, and I ran the sum fast in my head. Our 2 plots grew a little over 2,000 pounds of yellow sprout rice a year. Now Bong's price of 10 pounds to a stone made 200 stones at best. And after my grandfather's and father's cultivation, the household's living, and the field's upkeep, little was left over. 1 pill a day meant 365 spirit stones a year, near double the whole family's income. I started to raise the matter of the money. My grandfather thumped his cane and cut me off, his voice low and past all argument. My father's pills had been stopped, his own halved, and my uncle, fresh into the innate realm, needed none for the transition and could draw spiritual chi on his own. Everything saved went to me. I looked up at him, a face crossed with deep wrinkles, graying hair stirring in the morning breeze, an old cotton robe with 2 patches, a cane head polished bright with use. Anyone who did not know he stood at the 3rd layer of chi refinement would take him for an ordinary old man. A chi refinement cultivator lived only 150 years. A martial artist who had condensed a spiritual route to break through carried a shorter span than most because the martial road itself burned life, worst of all for those without supplements. In his youth, my grandfather had leaned on nothing but his own aptitude, clawing up until he cracked the innate realm at 50 and became a cultivator, his lifespan heavily spent. By my father's generation, with decent aptitude and a cultivator's resources behind him, he reached the innate realm at 18 with almost no loss. I tucked the bottle into my robe, stood, and bowed properly, and said I understood. My grandfather nodded and said no more, walking off slowly on his cane, then stopped without turning back. My father had told him, he said, that I meant to condense a fire spiritual root when I broke into the innate realm. I was caught off guard. It was a good idea, his voice drifted back on the wind. A fire root paired with my constitution, if I took the alchemy road one day, and 1 furnace of pills would be worth 10 plots of spirit field. He went on, cane tapping the bluestone, and said that if the family meant to rise, farming alone would never do it. I stood watching his hunched figure vanish behind the main house. Alchemy, I had thought about it. An unranked thing like a true chi pill fetched a spirit stone each, and a first-rank pill several at least, and higher still, pure profit. But it all rested on a fire spiritual root. When a man breaks into the innate realm, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth floods him and the Dantian condenses a root on its own. Its attribute usually ties to bloodline and to the technique practiced. The innate art carried no attribute and could not steer the root, so a fire root had to be prepared before the breakthrough. There was no rush. I stood at the 7th layer of the postnatal realm, with a long way still to the innate. I sat back down, swallowed a pill, and let the warm current pour into my meridians while bronze skin and iron bones locked the medicine down. 3 months passed in a blink, and winter came to the city, the first snow settling on the bare branches of the locust tree. I sat under it with true chi surging, a chi membrane pushing 3 inches off my skin. The 9th layer of the postnatal realm, peak, 1 step from the innate. I opened my eyes and breathed out a mouthful of turbid air that hung white in the cold. 3 months from the 7th layer to the peak, faster by 2 months than my grandfather had guessed. It came on the strength of the true chi pills, the bronze skin and iron bones, and the depth extraordinary savvy gave my grasp of the art. I stood and stretched. At 7.5, my frame already matched a 9-year-old's, the constant tempering pushing my growth past my peers. Yet I did not look bulky, my muscle tight and lean like a snake fresh from its molt. My father's voice came from behind the screen wall, asking if I had finished my seclusion. He rounded the wall in a thick grayish-brown robe, collar up, 2 sticks of candied haws in his hand. He tossed me one. I caught it and bit, sweet and sour, and asked what the occasion was. He did not answer, only bit 2 haws off his own stick and tilted his head to size me up, then told me to come out with him. I paused, going out. In 7.5 years, the farthest I had ever gone was the courtyard gate. I asked where, and he smiled and said, to see the place where I would make my way in the future. When the main gate opened, I stepped onto the streets of the city for the first time. At winter noon, the sun was bright and white off the bluestone. Buildings of every height lined both sides, from plain brick and tile houses to the bracketed, upturned eaves of cultivation estates. Now and then a flash of spiritual light darted from some attic window and traced a faint arc in the light. The people fell into 3 kinds. Mortals were the most, in coarse cloth, hurrying with downcast eyes. Next came martial artists, steps steady, back straight, most of them armed, and when I brushed them with my senses, most sat in the body-tempering realm. 1 or 2 in the postnatal. Rarest were cultivators, and I walked half the street and saw only one. She was a middle-aged woman leaving a pharmacy so lightly she seemed not to touch the ground. Spiritual light sliding between her fingers as she tucked herbs into the storage pouch at her waist. Chi refinement. Cultivators and mortals shared the same street and did not touch, the mortals parting around the cultivators the way a stream parts around a stone. My father pointed things out as we walked. The street ahead was Hobu Lane, where the Hunters Guild stood and my uncle used to take bounties. The 3-story building on the left was the Jin family's shop, selling spiritual artifacts we could not afford. Turn right for the pill workshops, only 2 in the city, one run by a master Jew at the 5th layer of chi refinement and a foul temper, counted the Jin family's rival. The Jin shop sold unranked pills and Master Jew's workshop first-grade ones, so it was clear enough who stood above whom. I listened and watched, carving the street layout and shop lines and the flow of people into my mind. At a crossroad, my father stopped and pointed north with his candy skewer and named the Na family. I looked, At the end of the northern street, a great mansion took up a whole block, with vermilion gates, 2 stone lions, and an ebony plaque reading "Nay Mansion" above the lintel. Spiritual chi spilled faint over the walls, and a sweetness hung in the air. The Nay family, he said with no bitterness, only fact, was the one foundation establishment house in the city. The old man Na Hongwon, at the second layer of foundation establishment, called the shots in all of it. I drew my gaze back. Foundation establishment. We were at Chi refinement, a full realm below, and I asked about our own family. We ranked with the Jin family, he said, both Chi refinement houses, but the Jin foundation ran deeper. He bit off his last haw and threw the skewer in a bin. He named their old ancestor, Jin Hyun Jin, at the 8th layer of Chi refinement, holed up in the city 40 years, with 3 sons and a grandson under him, all in Chi refinement. Past the direct line ran a crowd of branch kin and servants, a proper family power beside our thin one. I ranked them silently. Na family at foundation establishment, Yuk family at upper Chi refinement, Yuk family at the bottom of it. The food chain was plain at a glance. Then my father tilted his head and winked, and said that even so he and Uncle Na were brothers, and for connections our family had more backbone than the Jin. I did not answer. Connections were connections, and strength was strength, and no world I knew let you trade one for the other. He turned into a narrow alley, walls mottled on both sides, bluestones cracked underfoot, dead leaves heaped in the corners. At its end sat a small courtyard, its gate unpainted and split by a crack, the ground before it swept clean. 2 pots of frozen wilted orchids by the steps. He knocked 3 even beats and the door opened from within. A middle-aged man stood behind it, early 40s, gaunt, with high cheekbones and eyes sunk deep in dark rings. He wore a faded blue robe loosely belted, his left shoulder tilted forward from years bent over a desk or a workbench. I scanned him. His aura was reined in, but his breath ran fast, short in and long out, his true chi circling inward rather than shown. The 5th layer of the postnatal realm, and hiding it. Though not from me, the moment he saw my father, his tight face eased and he forced a smile and said his name. My father nodded and stepped aside to show me, and told me to greet his old senior brother, So Hua. I cupped my hands and greeted Uncle So. He blinked, his gaze settling on me, running me over for 2 seconds, then said, "So this was Yuksung, a good child, and a spirited one." He turned inside, took a small porcelain bottle from a cabinet, and offered it as a meeting gift, a bottle of true chi pills. Not worth much, no need to mind it. I took it in both hands and thanked him, my face wearing exactly the right smile. As it settled into my palm, I weighed it. Genuine pills, about 10, and I tucked it away with no intention of ever eating them. It was not pretense. I had read too much grim news in my last life, and having crossed into a cultivation world in this one, I judged the human heart only more tangled here. There was no harm in being careful with anything meant to be swallowed, given by anyone but the closest kin. My father and So Hua went into the main room and shut the door. I did not follow. I paced the courtyard, smaller than ours. Only 2 sections, a leafless jujube tree with a few shriveled dates still hanging, a stack of split firewood squared neatly in the corner. I stopped under the main room window, though I was not trying to eavesdrop. The 2 of them simply did not keep their voices down. So Hua said his daughter had been taken 5 days ago. They wanted 50 spirit stones, and that the men were holed up at a ridge 30 miles outside the city. My father asked how much he had gathered. 47, So Hua said, his breath growing heavier. He had borrowed everything he could, and even put himself on credit at the Jin family pharmacy, promising a year as a test subject. He was still 3 short, though he could make it if he sold the house, but he feared that once they had the money they would not give her back. Silence. Then So Hua said he had only this one daughter. My father did not answer at once. After a few seconds a chair leg scraped the floor, and he asked what sort of men they were. Scattered bandits outside the city, So Hua said. Their leader a man named Zhou Chio. My father asked his cultivation. Postnatal peak came the answer, but old, past 50, his blood and chi failing, with 7 or 8 under him, the strongest at the 6th layer of the postnatal realm. Another silence. Then my father's voice, light and airy as ever, said he would take the job. So Hua started to promise him the 50 stones after, and my father cut him off and said he had one condition. Name it. So Hua said, and my father told him his son was coming along. Outside the window I leaned on the wall, the corner of my mouth twitching. I had known it. My father had not brought me out for a stroll. Inside, So Hua hesitated and said I was only 7, and my father told him not to worry about that, and the room went quiet a long time. I pulled my back off the wall and walked to the jujube tree and looked up at the bare branches, a ridge of black pines, an old bandit at the postnatal peak. Blood. I closed my fists, the knuckles cracking faintly, bronze skin and iron bones working in silence, true chi steady in my meridians. 2 bottles of True Chi pills sat in my robe now, one from my own family and one from So-hwa, and the second I would have my father check when we got home. It was not that I distrusted So-hwa, it was the first lesson this world had taught me. Staying alive matters more than trust. The main room door opened, and my father came out wearing his usual easy smile, as if he had just settled some trifling matter. He told me it was time to go, and I asked where. He looked back at me, the smile fitting to show the edge beneath it, and said he was taking me to kill someone. Song Ridge lay 30 miles northwest of the city, its slopes packed with black pines thick as bowls, standing like a solid wall. The needles had not yet fallen, a green so deep it verged on black, and when the wind moved the whole mountain seemed to breathe. So Hua walked in the lead, a long sword strapped across his back, its scabbard broken and bound together with 2 loops of hemp rope. I followed behind him in a gray padded coat, hands tucked into my sleeves, and the 2 of us climbed the gravel path from the foot in silence. At a flat clearing halfway up, he stopped and drew a firework tube from his waist, flicking his True Chi to light the fuse. Red light burst in the leaden sky and scattered sparks across the ground. I glanced up at the fading trails, then swept the trees. There were men behind 3 of the old pines. Their breathing hushed, but heartbeats do not lie. With my postnatal peak senses, I read a radius of 10 spans clean. 2 of them, one behind a pine to the left, one in the brush to the right, their blood key telling me the 5th layer of the postnatal realm and the 3rd. I kept my face empty and kicked at the gravel like a bored child. The bandit behind the tree studied me, his gaze crossing me 3 times. I let my own chi stay reined so that all he saw was a boy larger than his years and nothing worth fearing. His breathing slowed. The guard was down, and I marked both positions in my mind. We waited about the time an incense stick takes to burn before footsteps came up the path. More than 5 sets of them. The leader was a man near 50, short but broad through the shoulders, a ring pommel saber at his waist, his skin sallow and dry, an old scar riding his cheekbone. Zhou Qiao, his blood key sat settled in his dantian, and every step sank heavy. Postnatal peak in name, but the force of him drove downward and could not hold. So Hua had been right. The man's body could no longer carry the True Chi of his own realm, overdrawn in youth and paying the debt now. 4 more followed in short martial dress, faces rough and weary from too long in the hills. I read them one by one, the 6th layer down to the 2nd. With the 2 hidden in the trees, 7 in all, Zhou Qiao led a girl by the right hand, about 9, her hair matted, her face streaked with mud, her lips cracked, gaunt from hunger because they had plainly not fed her. She wore a thin jacket that was not hers, sleeves swallowing her fingers, her eyes red and swollen but dry. She kept her head down and stumbled where he dragged her, not daring to make a sound. So Yun, the instant So Hua saw his daughter, every muscle in his face pulled tight, his fingers clenched and opened, and he drew a cloth bundle from his robe and unwrapped it to show the spirit stones stacked neat inside. Money in one hand, the girl in the other, he said, holding his rage down. Zhou Qiao halted and measured the scene, a thin scholar and a 7-year-old child, then glanced left and right before answering. The 2 hidden bandits did not show themselves, but I felt their position shift to block the way back. Zhou Qiao said the rules had changed, that the stones came first and the girl after he had checked them. So Hua laughed from pure fury and refused. He wanted a simultaneous trade, so Yun walking over as the stones slid across. He pressed one hand flat on the bundle and swore that if he was cheated he would crush the stones to dust and no one would have them. Zhou Qiao narrowed his eyes, weighed him a few breaths, threw a look at me still kicking stones, and let his lip curl and agreed. He let go of So Yun's wrist. The girl froze, then looked up and saw her father, and started to say the word for him. So Hua set the bundle down and nudged it forward half a step, and told her softly to come, to walk slowly. So Yun began to move, one trembling step after another on legs weak from hunger, while Zhou Qiao crouched, took up the bundle and opened a corner to count. 50 stones, he said, and tucked it into his robe. So Yun reached the midpoint, 7 steps still short of her father, and a flying dagger slid from Zhou Qiao's sleeve into his palm, 3 inches of narrow iron-gray blade. I saw it, not with my eyes, but with my perception, the blood key in his wrist shifting from calm to gathering to a tight coil, the shape a strike makes before it comes. The dagger flew, silent, straight for the girl's back, and So Hua's pupils shrank as he lunged, too far to reach her in time. The 9-year-old walked on, blind to the cold light behind her. I moved. True Chi flooded my legs and I shot forward like a loosed bolt. As I flashed past So Hua, my fingers found the hilt on his back and tore the long sword free, the rotted scabbard splitting apart behind it. My right foot slammed the earth, waist and hip turning into the first form of the 13 swords. The straight thrust and the sword intent prototype erupted from my dantian into the blade. A sharp, invisible edge spread from the tip in rings like water, and every ring carried a cutting line, The flying dagger shattered, and that was only the beginning of it. I did not stop. The 13 swords ran in one breath, the oblique slash, the horizontal sweep, force stacking and compressing and bursting on the blade. A sword gale tearing across the clearing. The fragments of the shattered dagger were caught in the sword intent and flung forward in a fan of iron shards, and the 4 bandits behind Zhou Qiul never even cleared their sabers. The shards ripped through them. The 6th-layer man had his throat opened and dropped clutching it, and the 4th-layer man took 3 through the chest and folded. The 2 lowest, nearest the blast, were torn in a dozen places and dead before they finished falling. The 2 hidden bandits had only just poked their heads out. The wake of the 8th sword swept them, and the 3rd-layer man was thrown into a pine trunk with the sound of snapping bone. The 5th-layer man twisted clear of a killing blow, but the sword chi carved his left arm open, and he screamed and ran for the slope. He made 3 steps. My 11th sword turned and struck, the blade drawing its arc, and a mist of blood burst from his back as he crumpled onto the gravel and went still. The whole thing had taken less than 3 breaths. Zhou Qiul alone still stood. He had thrown his saber up to block the direct weight of the sword intent. It had left his arms numb, his palms split, cracks running through his blade. Pain flared in his chest, and a mouthful of blood rose in his throat, which he forced back down. He looked at the clearing, 6 of his 7 men dead, and the killer a 7-year-old boy. 50 years in the martial world had taught him one thing above all, that when you cannot win, you run and feel no shame. He turned and bolted into the pines. Even with his blood cue failing, the movement art of the postnatal peak still gave him a burst of speed. I went after him. Bronze skin and iron bones opened fully in the sprint, and I was not a hair slower than he was. The light was dim under the pines, the ground thick with needles and rock. He cut left and right down tricky paths worn by years in these hills. I did not care which way he turned. The 13th sword. I struck at a dead run. One sword, a plain straight thrust exactly like the first form, and yet this single strike held the whole weight of all 13. The sword intent poured from the tip and threaded the gaps between the trunks like an invisible line, entering the back of his skull. His body still carried forward on momentum, but his head had already left his neck. The skull tumbled into the needles, rolled twice, and stopped face up, the cloudy old eyes still wide, the mouth half open on words he never said. The headless body lurched 3 more steps and crashed down, blood pouring from the stump and steaming in the winter cold. I stopped, and blood dripped slowly from my sword tip. On the ground, a length of gut had slid from a gash in his belly, a wound the earlier shards had opened and his running had torn wider. I walked back, and the clearing was worse than the chase. 6 corpses lay scattered across 10 spans, some whole and some not. One turned to a sieve of a dozen wounds, another with a spine snapped so his body bent like broken sugarcane. The air was thick with rusted iron and the reek of split bellies. My stomach lurched, and I made myself look away and breathe twice. It did not help, and when I caught sight again of the gut sliding loose, I bent against a pine and threw up everything I had eaten that morning. Killing was not the hard part, but looking at what killing left behind was. So Yun had fared worse than me. She had collapsed in terror the moment the sword chi broke loose, and by the time So Hua reached her, she had already fainted. He held his daughter and shook, not from the cold, but from the feel of a man who has just walked out of his own grave. He looked back at me, a 7-year-old wiping a blade with pine needles, moving slow, as though giving my hands a task so my eyes would not have to travel the bodies. He opened his mouth, and nothing came. Steady footsteps came unhurried from deep in the woods, and my father walked out, hands in his sleeves, pine needles in his hair, plainly having crouched behind a tree a long while. He crossed to the edge of the clearing, took in the corpses and the blood, then knelt in front of me and asked if I had vomited. I said yes. He said it was always so the first time, that the first man he ever killed had made him vomit 3 times and worse besides, and that I had done better than him. I did not smile, and he did not push me to. He handed me a clean handkerchief and told me to wipe my mouth. He stood and looked off at the ridgeline and said that in this world men eaten and men killed were both ordinary things. If I had not killed these today, he said, tomorrow another daughter from a family like So Hua's would be taken, and it was as simple as that. I folded the handkerchief away and said I knew. Then what, he asked, was I struggling with? I was quiet a second and answered honestly that the bodies were too messy. He froze, then doubled over laughing and slapped his thigh and told me that next time I should leave a little margin and not turn men to pulp. I decided privately to work on my control. I gave the scabbardless longsword back to So Hua. He took it one-handed, his unconscious daughter in the other arm, and stared at me a long time before he managed my name and a thank you. I told him he was welcome, and that on the way home he should take back the spirit stones which were in Zhou Qiul's robe. He blinked, looked at the headless body, hesitated, then went and searched it and drew out the bundle, wiping the blood-smeared stones on the hem of his coat. So Yan did not wake the whole way back. I walked at the very rear, the winter wind knifing into my collar. I flexed the hand that had held the sword, and it did not hurt. Bronze skin and iron bones had drunk even the recoil. I ran the fight again in my head, and from drawing the blade to taking Joe Chiel's head, the whole of it had run under 20 breaths. The 13 swords carried by Sword Intent had overshot even my own guess at their power. But I did not let it swell my head. Those men had simply been weak, and between a common postnatal bandit and a postnatal peak fighter with Sword Intent lay a canyon. Today's enemies were only mountain bandits, and the road ahead was still long. By the time we reached the city, the sky was black, so Hua stood at our gate cradling Soyan, who had woken once on the road, dazed, calling for her father, before slipping under again. He had wrapped her in his own outer robe, his chin on her head, his eyes rimmed red. My grandfather waited in the main hall with a bowl of ginger soup already on the table. Nanny O took the girl to the heated brick bed in the west wing to settle her, so Hua sat with his hands on his knees and said nothing for a long time. My father poured in the soup and told him to drink first. His hands still shook as he took 2 sips and set the bowl down. Then he laid the 50 spirit stones on the table and pushed them across, saying they were my father's now that the matter was done. My father glanced at them and did not move. So Hua went on, and his lips worked several times before the words came. He owed the Jin family pharmacy 40 stones and had signed on as a medicine tester for a year to clear it. My grandfather tapped his cane once from the head of the hall. He understood exactly what that meant. A medicine tester swallowed unrefined pills for the Jin pharmacy and recorded how his body answered. It sounded respectable and was little more than gambling with your life. Mild properties leaving you whole, violent ones leaving you crippled with luck or dead without it. 40 stones for a year was the price of a life. So Hua said he had sold his courtyard to raise the ransom. They had nowhere to live, that his daughter was 9, and that while he tested pills, she would have no one. My father finished the sentence for him. She would stay at our house. So Hua looked up. My father sat with one leg crossed and told him not to talk nonsense, that a little girl did not eat much and they would simply raise her. So Hua's lips trembled, and he said that at least let her be a maidservant, that she could not eat and stay for nothing. My father frowned and asked whose 9-year-old girl worked as a maidservant. My grandfather cut it off with a word that left no room, saying the child stayed, that So Hua should go clear his debt with a settled mind, and simply not die out there. So Hua bowed to them both. My father waved the formality off and said if he truly felt indebted he could stand a good meal once the debt was paid. So Hua said nothing, but I saw him wipe his face on his sleeve as he went out the door. When it closed, I stepped from the corner, and my father looked down and asked if I had heard it all. I said yes. He told me So Yun would share the west courtyard with me from now on. I should keep an eye on her and not frighten a girl fresh from such an ordeal. I nodded. He nudged the stones into 2 piles, told me to give 30 to my grandfather for the pills, and keep 20 for my own future breakthrough to the innate realm. I went back to the west courtyard. So Yan lay on the heated bed, washed and changed into an old jacket of mine that Nanny O had let down, sleeves still long, curled under the covers with her eyes shut. She was not asleep, and her breathing came uneven and shallow. I did not disturb her and stepped out into a courtyard where the winter stars lay scattered like crushed ice on black cloth. Then I went in, sat cross-legged, and began to cultivate. Tomorrow, I would go into seclusion. I had already touched the threshold of the innate realm. On the first day, the innate art reached its own perfection. I ran it at full power, my postnatal peak true chi surging through 9 meridians and hammering the invisible barrier at my Dantian. The barrier was thick. It was not a wall so much as a membrane, and the true chi rushed it and bounced, and with every strike it thinned a fraction. Here the toughness of my bronze skin and iron bones meridians earned its keep. Where an ordinary cultivator's channels would tear under the backlash and need rest, mine were washed over again and again without a trace of ache. Extraordinary savvy let me feel the weak spot exactly, not at the center of the Dantian, but 3 points to the lower right. Each strike I drove 7 parts of my power into that 1 point, and my pace doubled. On the 7th day, So Yan woke. Her whole body went stiff in the strange room, and when Nanny O brought millet porridge, she shrank into the corner of the bed and pulled the quill to her eyes and stared. Nanny O only set the bowl on the bed's edge, sighed, and left. Half an incense stick later, the bowl was empty. By the 15th day, the girl had begun to drift around the courtyard, soundless, hugging the base of the walls like a cat caught in the rain. When my uncle split wood, the crack of the axe sent her bolting back to her room, so from then on he moved his chop into the backyard and let it be. She did not speak or cry or make a fuss. At meals she crouched in a corner, emptied her bowl as fast as she could, and stayed hunched as if waiting to be driven off. No one drove her off. When my grandfather passed, he stopped, looked, and added a spoonful to her bowl, and she froze and gripped her chopsticks and lowered her head. On the 20th day, Nasoso arrived, her father come to the house on business and bringing her along. She ran for the west courtyard, calling my name with a bag of sesame crisps in her arms. My door was locked, and I was deep in the barrier, so she found no one. And when she turned, she saw So-yeon crouched against the wall. The two girls looked at each other. One was 7.5 and round-faced with crumbs at her mouth, the other 9 and gaunt cheekbones still sharp from the bandit's den, drowning in my old jacket. Na-so-so asked who she was, and So-yeon only pulled her head down. Na-so-so crouched in front of her and asked if she was cold, and So-yeon murmured that she was not. Then Na-so-so broke off a piece of the crisp and held it out, saying it was fragrant, that her mother had made it. When So-yeon would not take it, she pushed it straight into the girl's hand and told her to take it. So-yeon gripped the crisp with trembling fingers, bent her head, and took a small bite. Na-so-so asked if it was good and sat down beside her, breaking off her own piece and chattering that her house had osmanthus cakes even better. So-yeon ate in silence, and each time she finished a piece, Na-so-so pressed another into her hand, and after the second, one So-yeon's eyes went red. She made no sound, but the tears ran down and dripped onto the old jacket. Na-so-so panicked and asked why she was crying, whether it was not good. It was good, So-yeon said, her voice shaking. Na-so-so let out a breath, patted her shoulder with clumsy firmness, and told her then not to cry. She would bring some every time she came. So-yeon wiped her face and looked up and asked her name. Na-so-so patted her own chest and gave it, then asked hers. So, the girl said, So-yeon. Na-so-so declared it a lovely name, grabbed her, and hauled her up to go see the huge locust tree the family had. So-yeon was dragged a few steps before she looked back at my shut door, not knowing what the boy who had saved her at that ridge was doing behind it. Behind the door, wave after silent wave of true chi was spreading out. By the 28th day, the barrier had worn paper thin under a month of impacts. One last breath. I steadied it, drew the blood and chi of my whole body to the dantian, and struck the weak point. The membrane trembled and did not break, but this time it felt different. Not pushed open from without, but cracking from within. An impossibly fine split. I did not hesitate. Every scrap of true chi compressed to a point, an invisible awl driven into that crack, and the crack widened, and then it broke. The moment the barrier shattered, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth poured in from the crown of my head. It came not through the window or up from the floor, but from every direction at once. The roof, the walls, the ground, every grain of dust in the air. My bronze skin and iron bones meridians rang under the scouring. Skin and muscle and tendon and bone all cleansed together. The innate art ran itself at its highest pitch, and my technique, my sword intent, my physique and my comprehension fused into one and lifted me in a single step. In the dantian, the spiritual chi coiled and pressed into a small ball of light. My spiritual root was condensing. My foundation was deep, unlike an ordinary martial artist's, so there was no need to stabilize slowly. The family had prepared for this. They had spent 30 spirit stones on a first-grade fire attribute vermilion fruit. For months I had used the breathing of the innate art to seep its medicine into my dantian a thread at a time, tinting the base color toward fire. It was my grandfather's method. It could not force the outcome, but it dragged the odds from pure chance up to 1 or 2 in 10. Now, as the spiritual chi flooded in, guided by both the true chi and the fire medicine, the ball of light began to change, milky white to pale yellow to orange red, and the heat rose. A scorching wave rolled out from my dantian through my whole body, and a thin red glow surfaced on my skin like charcoal breathed upon. The room's heat climbed sharply, the water bowl on the table steaming, the frost flowers on the window paper melting to trickling drops, white steam puffing from the cracks in the door. Out in the courtyard, Na-so-so, feeding chickens with So-yeon, looked up and fanned her collar and said it had gotten hotter. So-yeon felt it too and turned toward my shut door, where a sliver of orange-red light leaked through the seam. In the main house, my grandfather stood from his chair, his cane striking the floor, 3 times faster than usual, and my father rushed out to meet him at my door. My father stared at the door and breathed the word innate. My grandfather laid the cane across his path and told him not to disturb me. The heat held for the length of a burning incense stick and then all at once drained away, the room falling quiet, the temperature dropping. The door pushed open from inside and I stood in the doorway. My 7.5-year-old frame had grown another ½ inch. My skeleton stretched again by the infusion, shoulders broad and arms long, lean and hard. I walked out calm. The aura around me had deepened a whole level, no longer the outward membrane of the postnatal realm, but a rained spiritual chi, my breath moving in step with heaven and earth. My grandfather tapped his cane once and asked after the spiritual root. I raised my right hand palm up, and a small flame the size of a candle's rose from it, orange-red, its tongues dancing upright in the center of my palm. A low-grade fire spiritual root. His fingers tightened on the cane head. My father was openly overjoyed, and my uncle poked his head from the back courtyard, saw the flame, and choked his shout down into a muffled grunt. I closed my palm and drew the fire back. On the panel, the columns lit. Innate realm, the first layer of chi refinement, a low-grade fire spiritual root. 7.5 years old. In the innate realm, the first layer of chi refinement. The road my grandfather reached only at 50 and my father at 18. I had walked in 7.5 years. The courtyard was silent. 3 breaths. My grandfather turned and started for the main house on his cane, and after 2 steps his shoulders shook, not from sadness, not from excitement, but from something with no name for it. He did not look back and only said there would be extra dishes tonight. My father looked at me and offered no grand speech, no well done, only the same smile as ever, and named it, a fire spiritual root, just like his own. Na Soso came running, dragging Soyeon, demanding to know what had been burning in my hand, calling it amazing, then showing her own palm where water light shimmered instead. That startled me. By her frame she had clearly never trained the body, which meant she carried a natural water attribute spiritual root, low grade at best, or her cultivation would be past the first layer. From the awakening of her root at 6 until now was a year and a half. She still sat at the first layer, though Uncle Na would surely spare his daughter no resources. I looked her over and reached the only conclusion left. The little glutton was simply lazy. So Yeon stood behind her like a small shadow, watching me quietly. I said it was nothing and told them to go eat. That evening the main hall held 2 dishes more than my own birthday had. My uncle had run down a wild rabbit in the hills, and my father had stewed a pot of rabbit and radish soup all afternoon. My grandfather dug out half a jar of 2-year-old yellow wine from under the cabinet. 7 of us sat. I sat on my father's right, and Na Soso squeezed in again on her low stool. This time Soyeon was there too, quiet at Na Soso's other side, her chopsticks reaching only the 2 dishes in front of her. My grandfather raised his bowl, said I had reached the innate realm, tapped the table, and drained it. My uncle followed and boomed that at 7 the innate realm, and the first layer meant our ancestors' graves were smoking, and my father kicked him. My grandfather set his bowl down and cleared his throat, and the hall went quiet. Now that the spiritual root had formed, he said, the matter of a technique had to be raised. I set down my chopsticks and sat up. The innate art carried no attribute, and taking me to the innate realm was its ceiling. So using it in chi refinement was like mining with a hoe. Possible, but far too slow. My father took it up. A fire root wanted a fire technique, and we had none. And the 5 elements formula he practiced was only an entry-level thing, broad but low-ceilinged. He glanced at my grandfather, who nodded and told him to go speak with Na Bong. A foundation establishment house surely kept fire techniques, and whether they suited us or not was worth asking first. The talk turned to other things. My uncle spoke of a bounty freshly posted at the Hunters Guild, a nest of first-grade yin fiend beasts on the eastern foothills of Undu Mountain. The reward was 100 spirit stones, and cultivators of the 3rd layer and above were forming teams to clear it. 100 stones, he said, licking his lips, though he had not fully converted his cultivation and could not touch it yet. But once he steadied, in half a year, when a martial artist breaks into the innate realm and condenses a root and converts to chi refinement, his physique and his martial concept put him on a level with an ordinary 3rd layer cultivator. My grandfather wrapped a table leg and told him to mind his own cultivation, that first-grade yin fiend beasts were nothing he could touch now. My uncle pulled his neck in and said he knew. Na Soso listened, lost, and whispered to me asking what a yin fiend beast was. I put a piece of rabbit in her bowl and told her to eat. She puffed her cheeks and complained that I was always like this, but the meat went honestly into her mouth. So Yun sat watching the table. My grandfather sat upright with his cane and ate unhurried, my uncle loud with his scar dancing when he laughed, my father seeming flighty and yet checking every bowl for what it lacked. Nanny O stood at the door muttering at them to drink less wine, and Na Soso chattered on her left, dropping food into her bowl between words. So Yun had lived with us near a month now. No one had chased her off, scolded her, or made her work to earn her keep. My grandfather added to her plate whenever he passed. My uncle had moved his chopping to the back. Nanny O had sewn her a well-fitting new coat from fresh cloth. Not one of my cast-offs let out. Every time Na Soso came, she brought food and hauled the girl around the courtyard, thoughtless in her talk and warm in every word of it. There was none of the cramped feeling of living on sufferance. Na Soso leaned in chewing and told Soyeon to give them a smile, and Soyeon asked smile at what? Na Soso said just smile, that she was as dull as me. I lifted an eyelid across the table and said nothing. The corners of Soyeon's mouth twitched up, the smallest curve. Na Soso's sharp eyes caught it and she slapped the table and crowed that she had smiled. Soyeon ducked to her rice, ears red. My father saw it and drank and said nothing, and my grandfather saw it too and only tapped his cane. After the meal I went back to the west courtyard, but did not go straight in, standing a while under the bright winter stars while the panel floated in my mind. It read, Host, age 7, innate realm, first layer of chi refinement, low-grade fire spiritual root. the innate art at its limit, the 13 swords at sword intent prototype. The technique had to change. A low-grade root kept me low, but my grandfather had named another path. Alchemy. I drew my gaze back. The road was still very long, but the step under my feet was planted firm. As I turned to go in, faint footsteps came behind me. So-yeon stood by the moon gate in the new coat, holding a bowl of soup, head down, and after a long moment she managed to call me young Master Yuk. She held the bowl up stiff-armed and said Nanny O had saved the last bowl of soup for me. I came over and took it and thanked her. She stammered that there was no need, then ran a few steps, stopped, looked back as if gathering great courage, and thanked me for saving her before she truly did run. The hem of the coat flickered in the moonlight and vanished behind the door. I lowered my head and drank the rabbit and radish soup, still warm. I looked toward the main house, where the lamplight threw my grandfather's hunched shadow on the window paper as he bent over the table, fiddling at something like a man writing a letter. I went in. What I did not know was that the letter he wrote would go before dawn by Spirit Sparrow to the Biolac sect, 300 miles south. It held a single line that the third generation of the Yuk family, 7 years old and innate, low-grade fire spiritual root, humbly begged admission to the sect. I learned the rest of it only later, and much of it I had to piece together myself. 300 miles south, on a mist-wrapped peak of the Biolac sect, in a pavilion hung over a cliff, an elder tended a pot of rare orchids by the window. She was the sect's third elder, Narin, a Foundation establishment master who looked no older than 30, and whose eyes carried a weight far past that. A message sparrow slid through the ward of her cave and became a thin letter on the jade table, unsigned, marked only with a spiritual imprint she knew to the bone. Her breath caught, and her fingertips trembled the instant they touched the paper. For 60 years, he had never once reached for her first. She did not open it at once, and the old memories rose in her like a tide. A mountain village, a creek, 2 children with their hair in buns. She calling out, "Brother Rim, look, I can lift this rock." He answering, "Careful, do not crush your feet." At 6, the sect master had passed through and found in her a 1 in 10,000 high-grade water spiritual root. She was taken as a personal disciple and carried out of the mortal world. He, Yuk Rim, had no root at all, and from then the immortal road and the mortal one ran apart. She had thought it a final parting, but he, out of a stubborn refusal to lose, had forced a bloody path through the martial Tao. Once she had slipped back to help him with pills and stones, he had smiled and refused her, saying they belonged to 2 worlds now, that he thanked her but meant to walk his own road. Later he married and had children, and hearing it, she sat in her cave 3 days and nights and sealed that improper longing away. Later still his wife died, and the sealed thing sprouted again like a weed, but she was a Foundation establishment master with her pride. She waited, thinking that if he were ever at his wit's end he might come to beg her. He never did. Decades passed until she believed the sprout long since withered. Until today. She burned the envelope to ash and read the one line, "The hand is vigorous as it had been 60 years before." It named the 3rd generation of the Yuk family, a 7-year-old innate with a low-grade fire spiritual root, begging entry to the sect. Her fingers tightened on the paper. A 7-year-old in it, his grandson. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the storm in them had gone flat calm. And under the calm burned a fire she could not put out. She called for her maids, told them to ready the flying boat, and said she was going to the city. They were stunned, not even knowing where the city was, but did not dare ask. A green jade flying boat broke through the clouds above her cave, its hull graven with glowing arrays. It turned to a streak of green light and tore south. She stood at the bow, sleeves cracking in the high wind, and thought, "Brother Rim, 60 years, have you finally decided to bow your head to me?" In the city, deep in the Na family's residence, the old ancestor Na Hongwan sat in a spiritual Kithik secret room, fighting through a bottleneck when a terrible pressure fell from the sky onto his soul. He spat blood and his circulating power collapsed. He shot into the air above his house and looked up to see the green jade boat descending, its light near eclipsing the sun. A woman in palace dress stood suspended above it, her cultivation a wall he could not see past. He bowed in midair as low as he could and named himself, begging forgiveness for failing to welcome her. Her gaze crossed him without pausing. "Biolac sect business," she said, "and unrelated persons should withdraw." His head buzzed. The Biolac sect was one of the 3 great sects of the eastern region, a true colossus, and to them a Foundation establishment cultivator in a border city did not even rate as unrelated. He scrambled down, keeping his head bowed. One thought left in him, what such a figure wanted here. He prayed his family had not stumbled into some disaster. Back in his residence, he sent a thread of divine sense out to follow at a distance. He watched the boat circle once, sink toward a shabby district in the west of the city, and stop over the Yuk family courtyard. He was stunned. The Yuk family, that newly risen house with one old man at the third layer holding it up, and a giant of the Beolak sect had come for them. An impossible thought took him, and he flashed straight into his son Nabong's study, startling him at his account books. He demanded to know whether Nabong had not once wanted his daughter married to that Yuk boy. Nabong said yes, bewildered, but that his father had refused to approve it, calling the Yuk Foundation too thin. Nonsense, the old man snapped, slapping the table, denying he had ever said such a thing, claiming he had only told the boy to observe them more. Now, immediately, he said, go to the Yuk family and settle the match. Whatever the gifts, whatever the terms agree, at any cost bind the two houses together. Nabong asked what on earth was happening. His father waved him off and said only that the Yuk family was about to soar, and that whether the Na family got a share of it depended on him now. Seeing his father lose composure as he never had, Nabong guessed something enormous had happened, dared not ask more, and swore to go at once. Meanwhile, my grandfather sat under the locust tree slowly carving his piece of wood, and stopped, and looked up as a vast shadow swallowed the whole courtyard. The green jade boat hung above us, an invisible pressure blanketing everything. My uncle and father went pale and rushed out from their cultivation. Na Soso and Soyeon hid behind a door with only half their heads showing, eyes full of terror. Naran leapt from the boat and landed in the courtyard soft as a falling feather, and swept the small half-ruined yard with a glance, the rusted iron sword on its rack in the corner. Her eyes settled on the hunched figure under the tree, graying hair, crossed wrinkles, a patched old robe, a half-carved wood scrap still in his hand. Something in her felt pricked, then cooled fast. Was this the man she had held in her mind 60 years? The one who would rather waste in the martial path than take a shred of her help? Had he taken any support at all, Brother Rim would not sit at the third layer at this age. Time is the sharpest carving knife. My grandfather rose, tucked the carving and knife into his sleeve, and gave her a slight cupped hand salute, with his back held very straight, and said Senior Naran had not changed. The warmth drained from her eyes into the flat indifference of a Foundation establishment master. The last of her longing turned to ash at the sight of his aged face. She asked where the person from his letter was. He seemed not to notice the change and turned aside, calling my uncle, my father, and me to come and greet Senior Naran. My uncle and father hurried forward and bowed low, and I bowed behind my father the same way, and stole one glance up. She was beautiful past looking mortal, and the cold distance she kept about her cut sharper than the winter wind. Her gaze brushed my uncle and father with a faint sound and passed on, the descendants of that mortal woman earning no kind look, and fixed on me. It is you, she said, and pointed a jade-clear finger at me from across the yard. A gentle, unrefusable force wrapped me, my inner chi and blood, and even my bones and meridians seeming to turn transparent under it. She was surprised. 7.5 innate, first layer, a foundation solid and blood-thick beyond the pill-fed norm. The root indeed low-grade fire and impure. But the physique gave her pause, a bone density and meridian resilience unlike anything she had seen, though faint, as if not yet fully formed. A talent worth raising, she judged, only the root too poor. She withdrew her finger, decided, and said my aptitude would do. She would give me one chance, she said. If I could cultivate to the 4th layer of chi refinement by my own strength before 12, she would take me herself as her personal disciple. My father and uncle were thunderstruck. A personal disciple of a Biolak sect Foundation establishment master, an immense fortune, and my father flushed red and opened his mouth to accept on my behalf. But my grandfather spoke first. He said my aptitude was dull and I could not bear such a weight, that I was not worthy to be her personal disciple. He cupped his hands and bowed deep, and asked only that she grant an entry token, so that at 12 I might have a chance to enter the sect. That alone, he said, would be a great kindness. My father was dazed, my uncle dazed, both wondering if he had gone mad, refusing an elder's offer of discipleship. My father tried to speak and was stopped by one look from him. I stood with my head down, mind racing. A personal disciple was the heavens in a single step. An entry token was starting from nothing, so why choose the harder road? I looked at my grandfather's back, and the hunched figure seemed very tall just then. Naran was stunned too. She had pictured him weeping or wild with joy, never refusing, and never with the reason that his grandson was unworthy of her. She looked at his wrinkled face and stubborn eyes, and for a moment seemed to see the youth of 60 years past by the stream, smiling and telling her he must walk his own path. He had not changed. The pride that would take no favors had never been worn smooth by time. A crack ran through the frozen lake of her heart, softening it a little without her knowing. So be it, she sighed. As you wish, and flipped her hand and tossed an all-green jade token that arced through the air and settled steady in his palm. Before the age of 12, holding this, I could enter the Biolak sect's outer sect. Then she turned without looking back, became a streak of light, and was gone into the boat. It hummed and vanished into the horizon, the pressure lifting, the courtyard at peace, as though none of it had happened. My father could hold back no longer and rushed to my grandfather, stamping in distress, demanding why he had done it. As a personal disciple, he cried, no one in the sect would dare bully me and resources would never lack. My uncle looked equally lost. My grandfather held the warm token, turned and asked me what I thought. I was quiet a moment, then looked up and said his grandson would listen to him. He smiled, the wrinkles smoothing, and called me a good boy, and patted my father's shoulder to settle him, saying he saw only the gains and not the risks behind them. What risks? My father asked. Enormous ones, my grandfather said, his eyes going deep. Why would Senior Naran give me the chance at all? Not for any brilliance of mine, but because of him. The favor was bought with his old face. If she took me as a disciple today for his sake, then tomorrow others in the sect could trip me from behind out of envy or faction. How far could a personal disciple placed by nepotism ever climb? And how many years, he asked, did he have left? For once he died, the favor died with him. I would have no one to lean on and only harder going. My father opened his mouth and could not answer. But an entry token was another thing, my grandfather said, handing it to me. Entering with it, I would be only an ordinary outer disciple, drawing no one's eye, free to compete and fight for myself and climb by my own fists and wits. Everything won that way would truly be mine, beyond anyone's taking. A road is only steady when you walk it yourself. I took the token, cool in my hand, and understood. He was paving me the safest, longest road in his own way, not chasing the heavens in one leap, but a foundation that would hold. I said I understood, and gripped it tight. My father came to himself too, his face full of realization and guilt, and admitted he had thought too simply. My grandfather shook his head and said he was still too impulsive, and was about to say more when a knock came at the gate. Nanny-O opened it on a beaming Nabong, who burst in shouting great news before he had cleared the threshold, red-faced, seizing my father's hand and shaking it. My father was lost, asking what had him so happy. His father, the family's old ancestor, Nabong crowed, had given the nod. To what? My father asked. Nabong turned to me, grinning ear to ear, and announced that the match between Nasoso and me was settled, set in stone. His shout pulled every eye in the courtyard. My father recovered first and asked him to speak slowly. What was settled? The marriage, Nabong said, slapping his thigh like a man who had struck treasure. Their old ancestor had nodded in person. The childhood betrothal was fixed. My father froze. A foundation establishment, great cultivator, had spoken on it personally. He glanced at my grandfather, whose face never moved, watching Nabong calm as if he had long foreseen this, his eyes seeming to say, keep acting. Nabong cared for none of it, and gripped my father's hand hard enough to grind bone, calling it the highest of joyous occasions. In-laws now, double the kinship. My father was shaken dizzy but warmed all the same. He and Nabong shared a life and death friendship, and the Yuk family leaned on the Na family for the sale of all its rice, a debt he never forgot. He said it was surely a good thing, only very sudden. Not sudden at all. Nabong pounded his chest, and as for betrothal gifts, only name them. Techniques, stones, artifacts, anything the Na family had was ours. My uncle listened with widening eyes, 100 times willing. Behind my father I grumbled inwardly. Betrothal gifts, when this was a dowry, had I become a man kept by a woman. Then again, it did smell awfully good. The reason for the old ancestors' turnabout was plain enough. The whole city had seen that sky-blotting boat. The Na family was betting that the Yuk family had climbed onto the great tree of the Biolac sect, laying their stakes early to share the broth. It was only human. My grandfather lifted his tea and blew on it and said marriage was a matter for the young. If the children had no objection, the old were glad to see it. And as for gifts, the sentiment sufficed. We were all family and needed no empty show. With one sentence he neither committed nor refused and left the Ney family plenty of face. Nabong, delighted past knowing up from down, agreed to everything. He turned and beckoned Nasoso from behind her door to greet her future father-in-law and grandfather. The girl went beet red and turned bashful in a way she never was, murmuring her greetings. She snuck a look at me, reddened deeper when she found me looking, and dropped her head to fuss at her hem. I found it strange, the familiar little glutton acting like a timid quail. So Jan stood at her side watching the scene with a trace of envy. Just as the joy filled the yard, another knock came at the gate, this one more polite and measured than Nabong's frantic shouting. Nanny-O went to open it. Outside stood several men led by a middle-aged one in a brocade robe, smiling, carrying an elegant air, and when my father saw him his own smile faded by half. The Jin clan chief, Jin Chang. Behind him came Jin family martial artists bearing gifts, sealed spirit tea and finely wrapped pastries. Jin Chang cupped his hands the moment he entered and hoped his unannounced visit had not disturbed us, beaming so brightly no fault could be found in him. My grandfather rose and returned the salute, saying the clan chief's presence lit our humble home, and bade him sit. The two houses, one an old Chi refinement family of the city, and one newly risen, rarely dealt with each other beyond nodding. Jin Chang's sudden arrival with gifts made his purpose plain. When Na Bong saw him, his smile dimmed and he gave a cool greeting. Jin Chang acted as though he missed the chill entirely and seated himself, saying Brother Na was here too. A truly auspicious day. For a moment, the little courtyard held figures from all three great families of the city, and the air turned subtle. Jin Chang's gaze circled the yard and settled on my grandfather, and he came to the point. Surely Brother Yuke had seen that flying boat over the city today. A grandeur only the great sects of the eastern region could own. Here it came, and I knew exactly what was happening. My grandfather sipped his tea and set it down and agreed it was a magnificent boat, that in all his years he had never seen the like. Jin Chang pressed that the boat had seemed to hover over this very residence a good while. My grandfather smiled, the wrinkles like the rings of an old tree, and said perhaps the pagoda tree in his yard grew so well it had drawn an immortal down to look. He pointed at the tree overhead, talking sheer nonsense with a straight face. Jin Chang choked, plainly not believing such a ghost story, laughed dryly and tried another angle. He said honestly he had come to ask whether a junior of the house had caught an immortal sect's eye. If so, it was a great joy for the city, and the Jin family should prepare a gift. The question was skillfully turned, at once a probe and a courtesy. My grandfather set down his cup and sighed with a touch of melancholy, and said he would not hide it, that an immortal had indeed passed by. Both Jin Chang and Na Bong pricked their ears. The immortal, my grandfather said, had judged my aptitude dull and not worth cultivating. He shook his head like a man let down by his grandson. My father's mouth twitched as he watched, thinking it a pity his own father had not joined a theater troupe. Dull aptitude, Jin Chang repeated, stunned, plainly thinking, who are you fooling? Would a foundation establishment senior come for dullness? Indeed, my grandfather said. All sincerity, the immortal had said that to enter the sect one must reach the 4th layer of chi refinement before 12. With my low-grade fire spiritual root and poor foundation, how could that be possible? So the immortal shook his head and left. It was a half-truth. He left out the Biolac sect and the entry token, and named only that near impossible condition, explaining the visit while hiding the real fortune we had won. Jin Chang listened half-believing. 12 years old and the 4th layer for a low-grade root was indeed a fantasy short of a mountain of pills, and the Yuke family was dirt poor. So where would the money come from? The thought settled him, and he decided the Yuke family had merely been a passing scene and climbed no high branch. So that was it, he said, his smile turning more genuine. A pity, though for a nephew to enter chi refinement so young was already a dragon among men with a limitless future. My grandfather demurred that I could not compare to the young talents of the Jin family. They traded a few more hollow compliments, and Jin Chang, feeling he had learned what he came for, rose to leave. Once the Jin family was seen off the yard eased back to what it had been, Na Bong looked at my grandfather with open admiration and called him brilliant, that with a few words he had wholly fooled the man. My grandfather waved it off and sat back under the tree with his half-carved wood. My father leaned to me and whispered that my grandfather was an old fox. I said nothing, only looked at the hunched back and then at Na Bong's happy face. A war without a wisp of smoke had ended just like that. That night, Na Bong drank with my father until both were flat drunk, shouting in-laws over and over, until my uncle carried him home, and the little courtyard finally fell silent. I shut my door and sat, running the day back. The Biolac sect had been a pebble dropped into the shallows of the city, and the ripples were the Na family's gamble and the Jin family's probing. The only way not to be swallowed in that churn was to grow stronger without pause. I looked inward at my Dantian, where a low-grade fire spiritual root turned spiritual chi at no great speed. By 8, I had cultivated on. On the surface, the city stayed calm that year while currents ran beneath. The Na family had bound itself fully to us, renewing the rice contract at a steep price, and visiting every few days with everything from spirit wine to Yao beast meat. Na Bong even brought a fire technique, the blazing flame formula, only a fragment but enough to carry a cultivator to the 10th layer. The Na family could not use it. It answered our need exactly, so my father took it like treasure and switched his cultivation to it at once. Half a year back, my uncle had also converted his martial true chi into spiritual power and stepped into the 1st layer. Though we still sat at the bottom of the city, we finally had a rising line. I, the center of all these shifts, stayed low the whole year. I cultivated the blazing flame formula and reached minor achievement in 6 months on the strength of my comprehension, doubling my speed and climbing steadily to the 2nd layer of chi refinement. At dinner, the family spread a full table. Na Bong came again with Na Soso, and So-Yan had folded fully into the household now, no longer the silent girl in the corner but smiling, helping Nanny O carry dishes. My uncle got tipsy, threw an arm around my father, and boasted that once he hit the 3rd layer he would go to Undo Mountain for Yin Fiend beasts. Na Bong fed the fire, promising to team up and go along. My grandfather sat sipping wine and watching the juniors carry on. I ate quietly, dropping meat now and then to the bowls of Na Soso and Soyeon beside me. Na Soso chattered about lessons from the tutor the Na family kept, and Soyeon listened, pursing her lips in a small laugh now and then, a scene of complete harmony. After the meal, I saw the Na father and daughter off and went to my room, shut the door, and drew a breath. It was here. My consciousness sank inward, and the panel rose in the dark, a red countdown ticking fast in its corner. 3, 2, 1, and then a crisp chime. The system had detected my rise in cultivation, it said, and upgraded from its first version to its second. The entry pool was expanded, and the odds adjusted. White entries at 80%, green entries at 20%. It asked whether I wished to make the yearly draw. My heart jumped. The system had upgraded, and the chance at a green entry had leapt from nothing to 1 in 5. My breath quickened, and I nearly shouted the word to draw, but I forced it back down. No, I could not be reckless. A 1 in 5 chance demanded a sense of ritual. I stood, went out, drew a basin of cold well water, and washed my face and hands. 3 careful times. Then I dug a brand new cotton shirt from the bottom of my chest and put it on. Back in the room, I bowed 3 solemn times toward the window, to heaven, to earth, and to whatever gods and immortals happened to be passing. My old life had taught me that before a draw, superstition is essential. Feeling refreshed, my luck gathered above my head, I sat and closed my eyes and told the system to draw. A wheel spun on the panel, countless entries flashing across it, most white, a rare dazzling streak of green among them. It slowed and slowed while my heart climbed into my throat. Then a flash of green. I snapped my eyes open, fists clenched. The panel congratulated me on a green entry, guaranteed. It called it the ultimate proof of the law of conserved luck. As a former hardcore gamer, it said, I knew the worth of a guaranteed prize in a 10 pull, and once I chose a sub-profession, every 10 attempts would yield at least one certain success. Reading it, I was stunned, then wild joy rose in me. A divine skill, tailor-made, a sub-profession, and no need to think about which. Alchemist. I had always fixed on alchemy, both the future my grandfather planned and the surest way I saw to change the family's fortune and pile up resources fast. But alchemy devoured money, wanting talent and experience in coin alike, and for a beginner the exploded furnaces and wasted pills came so thick that most hopefuls quit at the first step. My father was a living example, but now, with guaranteed, everything was different. 1 success in every 10, an unbeatable buff. I might still bleed money early, but as long as I could produce pills at all, there was always a road back. I paced the room twice in excitement before calming down, then lifted a floor tile in the corner and drew out a chest half my height from the hollow beneath. Inside lay an ancient bronze pill furnace, only a first-grade low-grade one in second hand. The family had bought it for a full 160 spirit stones after selling all its rice this year. A year's work, again spent to nothing. I stroked its cold surface and took out several yellowed booklets, a basic primer for alchemists, an illustrated handbook of common spirit plants, and a formula book Na Bong had fetched from outside years ago. It recorded only 2 pills, the unranked True Chi pill and the first-grade Chi gathering pill most used by early Chi refinement cultivators. A True Chi pill sold for 1 spirit stone at a cost of about half a stone a furnace. A Chi gathering pill sold for 4 at a cost of 2, the profit between them a matter of heaven and earth. In the primer I found the most basic method, the union of mind and spirit, which asked the alchemist to fuse mind and spirit wholly with furnace, flame, and medicine, and feel every smallest change. Easier said than done. My father had stuck here, his weak mental control leaving the flame unsteady, blowing up a new furnace for nothing and scarring him off alchemy ever after. But I was different. I had extraordinary savvy doubling my comprehension, and the willpower of diligence, and now the ace of guaranteed. Everything was ready. I set the furnace in the center of the room and took out the ingredients for 10 True Chi pills, 10 sets in all, gathered over half a year of my grandfather's frugality. I looked at them and drew a breath and told myself I would walk the road my father never finished, that the Yuk family's history as farmers ended with me. I sat, laid my hand on the furnace, and sent a thread of spiritual power to light the fire array plate at its base. An orange-red flame rose inside. Following the primer, I began with warming the furnace, feeding in a thread of mind, heating every inch of the inner wall evenly. This step went smoothly, my extraordinary savvy making the control effortless where my father had struggled. When the furnace was ready, I fed in the first set in order: blood-congealing grass, greenwood flower, iron wire vine. The moment they hit the heat, they melted into pools of colored medicine, and then came the hardest step: purification and fusion, burning away the impurities in each liquid by degrees. Sweat beaded on my brow. Controlling flame by mind was far harder than I had guessed. A fraction too hot, and the liquid charred. A fraction too cool, and the impurity stayed. An acrobat's walk on a tightrope where every step had to be precise. Then a drop of greenwood flower liquid over-purified and hissed into black smoke, The balance broke, and the other liquids caught it like a chain and boiled over. I tried to steady the flame and was too late. A muffled thud sounded in the furnace. A scorched stench filled the room. I opened it to a pool of black foul dregs. The first set failed. My face went dark as a pot's bottom. One set of ingredients, half a stone, gone. I did not sulk, only sat and traced the failure. My mind had wavered a heartbeat while purifying the greenwood flour and let the flame run too hot. I had botched the fusion order and should have joined the two mildest first. Then I cleaned the furnace and set the second, more careful, the purification smoother, only for a burst of violent energy to erupt in the final fusion and take it too. The proportions had slipped. I rubbed my aching temples and went on. The flame had wavered midway. The lid had come off half a breath early. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sets, each failing for a different reason. Each muffled thud landing on me like a slap. The room reeked of scorch until my head swam. 7 piles of black dregs mocking my confidence. 3.5 stones gone. If my grandfather knew, he would not eat for 3 days. Looking at the last 3 sets, even my steady nerves felt the weight. Guaranteed was my final confidence, yet I could not be sure it would hold. I shook the doubt off, for there was no turning back. The 8th failed, and the 9th, and by the 9th pile my face had gone pale, the drain on my mind immense. I looked at the 1 set left and fell silent. Powers of the entries, I thought. Show me your limit. I sat and settled my mind a full hour until spirit and power returned to their peak, then opened my eyes. A stray thought came. If I refined a chi-gathering pill instead this time, would it even count toward the guarantee? It was a different pill, likely beyond what a single green entry could cover. To be safe, I would wait for far richer resources before trying that, since ingredients were money and I had to break even first. I set the last set carefully into the furnace and moved through warming, purification, fusion without a shred of hesitation, for the 9 failures had not been worthless. Every step of the true chi pill was carved into me now, my hands holding the memory on their own. The medicine turned slow in the furnace and blended, giving off a faint fragrance. Everything ran smooth. Just as the pill was about to form, my mind wavered again. The very same feeling as the 9th failure, an uncontrollable energy rising to erupt. At that edge, a strange sensation welled up in me, and my faltering mind was pressed firmly back as if by an invisible giant hand. The medicine about to run wild went docile as a lamb. Seizing the fleeting moment, I made the seals and cast the final gathering technique and willed it to congeal. The furnace rang clear and resonant, a dense fragrance drifting from the seams of the lid, and I knew it had taken. I threw the lid open. At the bottom lay 6 pills the size of longan fruit, perfectly round, glowing faint white, unranked true chi pills, and 6 of them when even a proper first-grade alchemist found 6 in one batch hard to reach, as expected of the entry that fathered my luck. I felt my alchemy had sharpened a notch in that inspired instant, and with a few more such moments, I could refine steady even without guaranteed. My money was back. I sealed the 6 pills in a jade bottle and pushed the door open on a mix of medicine and burnt smell, stretching my stiff body, meaning to fetch water and air the room. Then I ran straight into my uncle coming back from morning practice, shirtless, steaming, sweat on his bronzed skin. His nose twitched and he followed the smell to my door and sniffed hard and said there was pill fragrance and a burnt reek both, and asked what I had been cooking. Before I could answer, he shoved the door and stuck his head in and froze. In the center of the room, the furnace still gave off heat. 9 piles of black dregs beside it, the fragrance pouring from the furnace itself. His mouth fell slowly open and his eyes near popped. He whipped around and locked his gaze on me and asked if I had done this. I nodded and said yes. He sucked in cold air and lunged in, circling the furnace twice, poking the dregs, until his eyes fell on the jade bottle in my hand. He asked if there were pills inside. I handed it over. He drew the stopper, took the clean fragrance full in the face, poured one out, and there it sat, glowing round and full in the morning light. He cried out that it was a true chi pill, and of such high quality. He stood dumbfounded. His nephew had only just reached the 2nd layer, and today had become an alchemist. What kind of monster, he said, then decided it was too big to keep. He stuffed the pill back, seized my arm, told me to stay put, and rushed out shouting for the whole courtyard to hear that something huge had happened. His voice carried across the whole house. In the backyard, my grandfather, guiding my father's cultivation, frowned at the racket, and my father looked baffled and wondered what madness had taken him. Soon my uncle dragged my father and steadied my grandfather into the west courtyard in a rush and pointed at the furnace and dregs, red-faced with excitement. My father was stunned at the sight, his eyes going from me to the dregs, his heart lurching. He asked, with a note of fear, whether I had touched the furnace, dreading I had blown it up as he once had. My grandfather was calmer. He stepped in, scanned the mess, and settled on the bottle in my uncle's hand and asked where the pills were. My uncle handed it over. My grandfather poured one out, sniffed it, scraped a little powder with a nail and tasted it. and pronounced the quality excellent and the medicine pure. Then he looked at me and asked if I had refined it. I nodded. My father was dazed, snatched the bottle and tipped the remaining 5 into his palm, crying, "6 of them, 6 from one batch." In his own day he could not so much as fuse the liquids, let alone form a pill, and his son on a first attempt had made 6 high-grade true chi pills. As for how they knew it was 6 from one batch, the family had bought exactly 10 sets for me. 9 were dregs, and the rest spoke for itself. My father felt his whole view of the world shaken, and blurted that his son had the makings of a pill saint. My uncle whooped in agreement, and my grandfather cracked his cane against a leg and demanded to know what he was yelling for. Did he want the whole city to hear? My uncle grimaced and shut his mouth. My grandfather's face went grave, and he asked in a low voice who else knew besides us. I shook my head and said no one. He let out a breath, looked around, and fixed on my father's face. He said the matter ended here and must never leak, that a boy who could refine pills at 8 was, if it got out, not an opportunity but a calamity. My father and uncle were no fools and caught the stakes at once. A 7.5-year-old innate cultivator was startling enough. Add an 8-year-old alchemist, and it was no longer genius but a prodigy that drew killers. A common man is innocent until treasure in his hands makes him guilty. My father nodded hard and said he understood. Then what of the pills? My uncle whispered. My grandfather thought, and said pills were good things, tradable for stones to speed our cultivation. That selling was a must, but never under the Yuk name. My father caught it and asked if he meant to use the Na family. My grandfather nodded. The Na family was in the same boat now, tied to the Biolak sect rumor, and would not dare cross us. It was safest in their hands. He looked at my father and made the call. My father would say he had refined them himself, would be to the world the Yuk family's newly risen alchemist. I stayed behind the curtain and cultivated in peace. My father was stunned and said, "Me?" "Yes," my grandfather said, past argument since he had studied alchemy once. A stroke of late luck was plausible. "And take the dregs," he added, "to feed the spirit fields." So it was settled. That same day my father sent word to Nabong of important business. Nabong came alone inside half an hour, shouting his greeting before he arrived, and my father brought him to the main hall where my grandfather waited too. My father poured tea, his manner a little stiff. Nabong gulped it and asked carelessly what the urgency was, having locked Nasoso home to cultivate. My father glanced at his own father, took the jade bottle from his robe, and set it on the table and told Nabong to look first. Nabong drew the stopper on the familiar fragrance, poured one out, weighed it, checked it, and said the quality was fine, better than the Jin pharmacy's stock, and asked what the trouble was. My father shook his head, drew a breath as if deciding something large, and said he had refined it himself. Nabong sprayed his mouthful of tea straight into my father's face and coughed and demanded to know what he had said. He had refined it, become an alchemist. Nabong knew my father's history too well. He was the boy who had once sworn to be an alchemist, spent a fortune on a furnace, and blown it up on the first batch. He near singed his brows off and never spoke of alchemy again. How had he suddenly made a pill today, and 6 of such quality? My father sat there with tea dripping off his face and nodded and braced himself and said it was a stroke of luck. One lucky batch. Nabong walked around him twice, clicking his tongue, and said he had truly struck gold. First he had sired a prodigy of a son, and now he was an alchemist himself. The Yuk ancestors' graves smoking to the heavens. My father gave an awkward smile. My grandfather cleared his throat from the head seat to steer things back, and said he had asked Nabong here to discuss a deal. Nabong dropped the joking and said to speak. My grandfather pointed at the pills and said that though my father had succeeded by luck, alchemy was ruinously costly and our foundation too thin to support it. So he wished to work with the Na family. Nabong's eyes lit and he grasped it at once. The Na family to supply materials and my father to refine. Precisely, my grandfather said. Nabong slapped his thigh and agreed without a second thought, calling it a fine chance. An alchemist who could steadily make pills was a treasure to any house, and this one was his future-in-law besides. A guaranteed win. "Tell me how to structure it," he said. My grandfather held up one finger. "We do not want stones," he said. Nabong paused. "We want only materials," my grandfather went on. "The Na family to supply 50 sets of true chi pill materials a month, and we would return exactly 50 pills. Nabong did the sum fast. 50 sets cost about 25 stones, and 50 pills were worth 50, which meant the Yuk family earned nothing and worked for the Na family for free. "That is no way to cooperate," he said at once, shaking his head. "The profit must be shared." My grandfather smiled and told him to let him finish. "For 50 sets we guarantee only 50 finished pills. However many my father can actually draw from those 50 sets is his own skill, and any surplus the Yuk family keeps." Nabong understood. They were betting on the success rate. If my father's skill were poor and 50 sets made only 50 pills, the Yuk family worked for nothing or lost. But if his skill were high and he drew 60 or 70, the extra was pure profit. No, Na Bong said. They were in-laws, and the 50 pills profit should split down the middle. For any surplus, the Na family took first refusal. Not at market price, but not cheating us either. Save 4 parts and 5 of market. A true chi pill was 1 stone, so 4/5 of a stone each, a price that guarded the Na family's interest, while leaving us a healthy margin. My grandfather and father traded a glance, each satisfied, and agreed. The Na family was sincerely building goodwill. Good, my grandfather said, settled, and Na Bong at once sent word by talisman for the Na pharmacy steward to bring the herbs. Before long, the steward brought 50 sets of true chi pill materials from a storage pouch, handed them over, and left without a word. Na Bong told my father this was the month's lot, to use it first and ask for more any time. Once the delighted Na Bong was seen off, my father looked at the pile of herbs on the table and felt he was dreaming, and asked his father whether it was really settled. My grandfather blew on his tea and said it was, that from today my father was the alchemist of the Yuk family. My father looked at the herbs, then toward the west courtyard, and his fists tightened on their own. These herbs would all end up in his son's hands, and his own task was to stand at the front and shield the boy from every wind and rain. Half a year passed in a blink. My height shot up like bamboo after spring rain, and at 8.5 I stood near 5.5 feet, a crane among chickens beside my peers. But for the childishness left in my face, I might have passed for 14 or 15. In that half year, the family changed beyond recognition. On my alchemy, running near a 1 and 2 success on the strength of guaranteed and yielding 3 or 4 pills a batch, our pockets filled fast. I also learned the limit of the entry, that refining a different kind of pill broke the guaranteed count. So I could not spam trash pills to bank a guarantee toward higher ones. From 50 sets a month, I could draw 80 or 90 true chi pills. 50 went to the Na family, and of the 30 or 40 left, some sold to them at 4/5 price, and some we kept. True chi pills were meant for postnatal cultivation, and chi refinement cultivators drew less from them, but they served. After all, you get what you pay for. The family had finally reached the small luxury of swallowing 1 first-grade chi gathering pill a month to help our cultivation, and the results showed. 2 months back, my father broke into the 3rd layer of chi refinement. My uncle steadied at the peak of the 1st, a step short of the 2nd. I, the hand behind all of it, climbed to the peak of the 2nd layer, maybe 2 months from the 3rd. My blazing flame formula, carried by extraordinary savvy, had reached major achievement, and my spiritual power circled and purified twice as fast as before. One afternoon, I stepped out of my room from a round of cultivation and found my father pacing the courtyard with a distressed look. I asked what was wrong. His eyes lit like a man seeing a savior. He pulled me aside and lowered his voice to ask humbly how I had trained the blazing flame formula to major achievement. He was miserable. Same technique, and he a whole realm above me at the 3rd layer. Yet after nearly a year, his own blazing flame formula still stuck at the entry level, his spiritual power stumbling in its channels. His prodigy of a son had reached major achievement in a single year. As a father, he found it deeply embarrassing. I looked at his thirst for knowledge and gave up, picking a few of my own insights to explain what I could. Spiritual power followed the mind's intent. Chi threaded the extraordinary meridians, and the mind held on the Dantian. He listened in a daze, frowning, then struck by revelation, and finally slapped his thigh and swore that was how it worked. The bottleneck that had stuck him for so long cleared in an instant. He told me to go about my business, that he was going into seclusion, and ran off to his room. I shook my head, caught between laughing and crying at the situation, a son teaching his father to cultivate. I sat at the stone table, and Nanny O soon brought iced plum soup and a plate of osmanthus cakes. So Yun and Na Soso trailed out after me. Na Soso had been locked away by her father to cultivate for half a year and had finally broken into the 2nd layer. The moment she was released today, she ran straight to our house. She carried a low-grade spiritual root, which was exactly why the old ancestor Na Homwan had first opposed the match. A rootless daughter he would never have minded, since not everyone has the talent to climb to the innate realm. She circled me, looking up in wonder, and demanded to know whether I had secretly eaten something good, since I had grown taller again. I sipped the plum soup and told her to eat fewer snacks, and cultivate more, and she would grow too. So Jan chuckled at the side and handed me a piece of osmanthus cake, saying to try it, that Nanny O had just made it. So Yun's cheeks had filled out a little, and in a well-fitting light green dress her eyes curved to crescents when she smiled. Just then my grandfather came out of the main house on his cane and called me over, and I followed him into the study. He took a small box from a locked drawer, 20 spirit stones left from this month's pills, and pushed it across, saying that with what we had saved before we now held 200, he was gratified. I was 8.5, at the peak of the 2nd layer, with a solid foundation, but bitter cultivation alone was too slow. So he had decided we could no longer refine only true chi pills. Starting next month, he said, I should set aside enough for 10 sets of chi-gathering pill materials and try my hand. A chi-gathering pill fetched 4 spirit stones on the market, several times a true chi pill's profit, and if I could make them, the Yuk family would truly ride the fast lane. I looked at the box and nodded, and said I understood. While we made our quiet fortune, the shape of the city was shifting. The plainest sign was a new shop, Na's Pill Pavilion, opened on the busiest street in the east by the Na family, and anyone with eyes saw they were stepping into the pill trade. The pavilion's main stock was the martial artist staple, the unranked true chi pill. Their pills ran markedly higher in quality and potency than the markets, yet sold at only 9 parts in 10 of the price. Fine goods cheap, fair to all. In no time the pavilion was famous, business booming, a steady stream of martial artists buying pills every day. Some rejoiced and some fretted. The Jew family workshop, which dealt in first-grade pills, went untouched. But the rise of Na's Pill Pavilion struck hardest at the Jin family pharmacy, which had long held more than 7 parts in 10 of the city's true chi pill trade. Then the Na family stepped in and tore away half its business. In the Jin family study, a celadon cup shattered on the floor, and the clan chief Jin Chang stood at the window livid, his chest heaving, snarling that the Na family had gone too far. Below him, the pharmacy manager trembled and dared not lift his head. He reported that Na's Pill Pavilion had cut prices again this month to 85 parts in 100, and their own custom had dropped another 2 in 10. Jin Chang wheeled around, his eyes dark, asking whether that old scoundrel Na Hum-Wan thought the Jin family made of clay. The manager reminded him low that they truly could not fight, that the Ney family was a Foundation establishment house, and rumors said they had climbed onto the high branch of the Biolak sect. Jin Chang muttered the names, Foundation Establishment, Biolak sect, and a helplessness rose in him, unable to win in trade or in a fight. He still saw clearly that sky-blotting green jade boat from half a year back. That old fox Ukrim had been vague after, saying only that his juniors were dull and unfavored by immortals. But plainly it was not so simple. The Na family never moved without profit in view, and unless they were certain the Yuk family had truly touched the Biolak sect, they would never court them so hard. Jin Chang was now near certain that the source of the Na family's high-grade true chi pills was the Yuk family. He growled at the manager to investigate, to learn whether those pills were really refined by Yuk Hoen. He wanted to know what that Yuk boy had been doing these 6 months, and what level he had reached. Everything, clearly. The manager obeyed. After a long while Jin Chang cooled, no longer angry, perhaps weighing whether to leave the city altogether. Their old ancestor had broken into the 9th layer of chi refinement some years ago, kept from public knowledge, and with him the world was wide and there was nowhere they could not go. All the more so since the Jin family served that lord. A month later, the back door of the Jin pharmacy opened at first light, and a hunched figure was helped out and nearly fell over the threshold. The shop hand let go, retreated, and slammed the door. So Hua leaned on the wall a long while before he caught his breath. His robe was of no clear color, dense with medicinal stains, some spots eaten through into holes. His left hand was wrapped in yellowing bandage, the fingertips that showed a sick grayish purple. When he lifted his face to the morning light, it was thin past knowing, cheekbones jutting, sockets sunk, temple hair gone white. His lips were cracked, faint scars where he had clawed himself when the medicine took hold. A man barely past 30 who looked past 50. He walked slow along the wall, tiny steps setting each foot down with care, as if afraid to break something underfoot. And after 2 streets he stopped against a tree, gasping. 1 year. A whole year. And he had lived. He drew a paper packet from his robe, a copy of the contract stamped with the Jin seal, declaring the testing term ended, and the bond between the 2 parties dissolved. He tucked it away and walked on, not west toward us, but south, toward a ruined temple where he meant to settle first, and mend. He had gone 2 steps when someone blocked him. My father, I learned all this later from him. My father wore a short gray tunic with a plain saber at his waist, and a burlap sack bulging with vegetables, looking like a man just back from the market. He did not know the ragged figure before him. He stepped aside and begged the stranger's pardon, and So Hua kept his head down and tried to pass. Then my father stopped short, staring at the back, his nose twitching, for that smell was too distinct, a year of sour and bitter herbs like a pickling jar. He darted around in front, bent and stared hard at the face, and 3 breaths later his sack dropped to the ground and he choked out my father's old brother's name. So Hua only lowered his eyes and twitched a corner of his mouth in greeting. My father looked him up and down and felt a stone lodge in his chest. A year ago, So Hua had been at least a 5th layer postnatal martial artist, sturdy and full of spirit, and now even a street beggar looked more whole. He wanted to curse the Jin family for heartless dogs, but cursing did nothing, since So Hua had signed the bond himself in black and white and we could not touch it. He had tried a year ago, before we ever brushed the Biolak sect, offering the manager spirit stones to redeem the man, and been smilingly shown the door. He was told that testers signed life and death bonds and that replacing one, an uninjured postnatal martial artist, cost far too much to bother. Where, my father asked, was he going? So Hua tilted his head south and said only to find a place to rest. My father seized his arm, and the arm was so thin his fingers closed all the way around it, and told him to come back to the Yuk family. So Hua struggled and could not break free. He could no longer even hold his postnatal cultivation, 7 or 8 of 10 meridians ruined, his inner chi in chaos. He begged not to be pulled. My father grew frantic and cursed him, saying his daughter had waited a whole year, and now he meant to go find a place to rest. He asked if he was even worthy of the girl. So Hua was silent a few breaths, then said it was precisely because he was not worthy of her that he could not go back. My father froze, so Hua raised his left hand, the grayish-purple fingertips trembling, and said the medicine had seeped too deep and ruined his foundation. If he went back like this and the girl saw him, he said, and then he did not finish. My father stood straight, brushed the dust from his hands, and told him to listen. She had lived well this year, eating and dressing well, even training under my uncle to body tempering perfection, even learning to make osmanthus cakes better than Nanny O's. So Hua's throat bobbed. But every night before sleep, my father went on, she stood a while at the courtyard gate, in rain and wind, and when he asked what she waited for, she only smiled and said nothing. Who, he asked, did So Hua think she was waiting for? So Hua's lips trembled. My father softened. So Hua did not look good now, he admitted, but a daughter did not care whether her father looked good, only whether he was there. If the meridians were ruined, they would nurse them. If the foundation was broken, they would find a way. So Yun sat on a low stool beside the platform with the illustrated handbook of spirit plants I had lent her. She was 10 now and much taller, thin and long-limbed, ponytailed, in a light green dress, still a childishness in her cheeks though her features had begun to refine. She turned a few pages, glanced at me, turned more, and stopped on a blood-coagulating grass, the same hemostatic her father once used. She stared at it a while, then closed the book. She knew what day it was. It had been exactly 1 year since her father went to the Jin pharmacy, and 1 year was the term they had agreed on. She rose, went to the low wall, and stood on tiptoe to look out, but the alley held only sparrows, and she sat back down. She did this every day, sometimes several times, and everyone saw it and no one spoke of it. I opened my eyes, my cultivation mediocre today, my mind drifting, and saw her holding the book absent. I asked whether she had finished it, and she came back to herself and shook her head, only to the 3rd chapter. I hopped down, poured her a cup of herbal tea and took a gulp myself, and told her the entry for that blood-coagulating grass was wrong. The book called it warm and sweet when it was in fact slightly bitter, a thing the author had missed. She took the cup and sipped and asked how I knew. I paused, then said I had watched from the side while my father did alchemy. I had nearly let it slip. She noticed nothing and only hummed, looking out past the wall again. I followed her gaze and did not ask further, only climbed back up and closed my eyes. Some things only hurt more for the asking. The courtyard fell quiet but for the faint buzz of spiritual power, and about an incense stick later footsteps came from the gate. 2 sets, one steady and one dragging. So Yan looked up sharp, and I opened my eyes. The steps stopped, and my father's voice drifted through the wooden door asking whether the girl was inside. She stood, the cup nearly slipping from her hand, and the gate pushed open. My father came first, supporting a man behind him in a filthy old robe, his bandaged left hand tucked away, his whole body thin as a pole. His face was ashen, his temples wholly white, a stranger beside the man I had seen a year ago. But So Yun's cup still fell and shattered on the stone. I jumped down frowning at the swaying figure. This was So Hua, aged 20 years and 1. Supported by my father, he came in, looked up, and saw her by the stone table, and his steps faltered. When he sent her away a year ago, she had been a scrawny girl of 8 or 9, shrinking silent into corners after her fright. The girl before him now had a ponytail and a clean green dress, and stood near to his shoulder, staring straight at him, hands empty, ringed by broken porcelain. He opened his mouth and his throat closed. Before he could finish her name, she had run to him and stopped. 2 steps short, looking him up and down, her eyes reddening without tears, and said one word, "Father." His nose stung and he turned his face aside. My father let go and stepped back to give them room, met my eye, and shook his head slightly. I understood, do not ask, we would talk later. So Yan reached for So Hua's right hand and looked down at the bandaged left. Her lips pursed and said he had lost so much weight. He nodded hard, his voice choked, agreeing that he did not look good anymore. She gripped his hand tight and said no, that she would make him osmanthus cakes and he would gain it all back. I walked to my father and we drew a few steps toward the back courtyard. There he told me low and fast that a year of testing had ruined 7 or 8 of 10 meridians. His true chi was near gone, his cultivation fallen below the first layer of the postnatal realm. I was quiet 2 breaths and asked if he could recover. Hard, my father spat, his face grim. Chaotic medicine still lodged in the meridians, and even with pills to nurse him, he did not know how much would come back. I thought, then said to let him stay. Eat and drink well and mend first, and that I would think of something for the meridians. My father glanced at me and asked if I had a way. I did not answer straight, only watched So-yeon walk her father into the house, her mouth going without pause about everything that had happened in the family this year. He tilted his head and could not get a word in. Then I asked my father whether he had seen the Jin family testing contract, and he startled and said he had, and why. I asked whether it made the Jin family answerable for after effects from lingering medicine. He thought back and his face shifted. No, he said. The contract only promised 50 spirit stones if a tester died during the term, and if after effects passed the term, not a single word. I hummed and said no more. Nanny O had already brought hot water and clean clothes, and so Yeon took them and settled her father in the guest room, and the courtyard went quiet. My father stood a long while looking toward the guest room, then muttered to ask what I had meant by that contract question. I had climbed back onto the platform. It meant nothing, I said. I only wanted to know whether the Jin family left themselves a back door when they acted. He stared, feeling my words carried more than they said, but did not press, and went to tell Nanny O to stew an extra pot of tonic soup. So Hua settled in. The first days he could not leave the bed, and Nanny O brewed medicinal meals while So-yeon fed him spoon by spoon. I spared 2 true chi pills, not for his cultivation but purely to nurse the meridians, and in a week he could walk a few laps of the courtyard. Delivering the pills, I watched him close. His meridians were badly torn, his spiritual power near dry, his blood thin, and drug residue lingered that no short time would clear. Untended, he had at most a year left. Ordinary pills could only ease it, and a true cure wanted a higher-tier detox pill. But the formula book I owned held only the true cure wanted a higher-tier detox pill, neither of which cleansed poison. I kept it in mind. It was not yet the time to solve it. The task at hand was my grandfather's charge, refining a first-grade chi-gathering pill. The herbs had been ready half a month, 10 sets for 20 spirit stones, nearly the family's whole surplus for the month. 10 sets again. I brought out the furnace and laid the herbs in order. The chi-gathering pill ran more than a level harder than the true chi pill. 3 more herbs, 2 more purification steps, the temperature control infusion twice as fine. I spent 3 full days studying every word on it in the formula book, and on the 4th night I shut my door and lit the fire array plate. The first set entered. Warming the furnace and adding herbs went step by step, but in purification the 5 liquids each had a temper of its own.